Good afternoon and welcome to this further session of the Digital Culture Media Sports Select Committee in our inquiry into disinformation and fake news. The committee is very grateful to Alexander Nix for agreeing to come back in front of the committee today to answer our questions. Appreciate a lot has transpired since the end of February this year. I thought it would be helpful for the committee and for the record, perhaps if you could just give us an update as to what the current status of Cambridge Analytica is, who is in possession of its assets, and what role do you have with the company at the moment?
Thank you, Mr. Collins, and I'd be pleased to answer your question. But before I do so, I'd like to make a few short clarifications. These will only take a few minutes, but it is important to be able to frame my answers.
I think, Mr. Nix, what I'd rather do is that if we could take the questions in the order the committee has them, I would imagine that we will probably raise questions and issues where you want to make clarifications and statements as we go through. If by the end of the session there are things that we've not covered that you wish to place your response on the record, I'd be very happy for you to make a closing statement to cover that off. But it's not the practice of the committee to have opening statements from witnesses. So I'd be grateful if we could start with the committee's questions and then see how we go through the hearing.
Look, I do appreciate that,
Yeah.
Ordinarily I would respect that, but these aren't ordinary circumstances, and so if I may, I'd like to start with a very brief statement just to set out my position.
Is this to do with the substance of evidence, or is this to do with your current status and the impact that might have on your testimony as a witness?
This is to do with framing my answers today.
Okay. Well, let's see how we do.
Thank you. First, as the committee is aware, I did not refuse to attend to give live evidence. Quite the contrary. Over the last few weeks, I've expressed to the committee my desire to attend, as I'm keen to deal with the untrue and misleading statements that have been made about me and my company over the past few months. My request was that this hearing was postponed until after the investigations in the United Kingdom and in the US have concluded. Alternatively, as with certain other witnesses, I asked whether evidence could be given in private, so that I was able to answer all of the committee's questions fully and openly. I've been given clear advice that discussing topics that relate to ongoing investigations in the UK and the US may prejudice those inquiries and infringes my right to silence. This is a fundamental right extended to all those who find themselves in a similar position to me. Nonetheless, I've been compelled to attend. With this in mind, you'll understand there is a limit to what I can say in relation to certain topics that touch on those investigations. Out of respect to the committee, I've attended today and will answer the questions that I can. Can I address straight away the suggestion that I misled this committee about receiving data from GSR?
Mr. Nix, I think I appreciate the opening statement about your position and the fact there are other inquiries which we're cooperating. I think we're now getting into you giving a statement about the substance of, I think this will be covered in the questions the members wish to put to you, and I'd rather take this on a question-by-question basis rather than being dealt with as a statement at the beginning.
I do understand that, but it is important. I push back on this, and so I'm going to have to insist, Mr. Collins, that I finish my statement.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Nix. I've allowed you to give this some of those opening remarks. I feel that your opening statement is now going into the substance of issues we want to raise with you, which is based on your previous evidence to the committee and the reason we invited you back. So I'm going to deal with that on a question-by-question basis. It's up to you how you respond to those questions. As I said at the beginning, if there are things that we've not covered where you wish to place a statement on the record, I'm very happy for you to do that at the end of the session once the members have completed their questioning. But I'm not going to allow an opening statement that goes into the substance of topics that the members will want to question you about.
Mr. Collins, you'll have plenty of opportunity, as will all the committee, to ask me as many questions as you want, but I have to insist on delivering the rest of this statement.
I'm sorry, Mr. Nix, it's not your place to insist on anything in front of this committee. You've agreed to come and you're here to answer the members' questions. I've allowed you to make some opening remarks about which I think reflect the constraints that you may be under because of other investigations you're taking part in, and that's completely proper. But I want now to go on to the questions the committee intends to put to you, and to my opening question, which is about the current status of Cambridge Analytica and your current status with that company. Could you answer that question, please, and then we'll go on.
As I said, I'd be pleased to answer that question, but we'll just finish this statement, if I may.
No, I want to start the questions now.
I accept that some of my answers could have been clearer.
So you're just reading out the statement. Can you answer the first questions that I've put to you? Then we'll go into the questions from the members. If there are other things you want to put on the record, I would imagine a lot of probably what's in that statement you can cover off in your answers to members' questions as we go through. So could you answer the first question, please?
Mr. Collins, I really don't think this is appropriate. Other witnesses have given statements to this committee, and I think I should be allowed to do likewise.
No, they've not given statements to this committee. People have been asked, as I've asked you actually, what is a relatively general opening question which you can respond to. And the character of all of the hearings so far has been that members have put questions, with myself starting as chair, to witnesses who've answered them, and we don't have prepared opening statements, and that is the case for all witnesses who appear in front of the committee, regardless of the circumstances. I think it was appropriate for me to allow you to make some opening remarks about your status as a witness, which I think is helpful to the committee's work. But the way this works is we ask questions and the witnesses answer them.
Could you repeat your first question, please?
Yes, thank you. I'd just really like you to say, since we last met, as I said at the beginning, obviously there's been quite a lot of change at Cambridge Analytica. Perhaps you could update the committee on what the current status of Cambridge Analytica is, who is in control of the assets of the company, and whether you have any direct involvement in the running of the company today.
So, Cambridge Analytica is in Chapter 7 in the United States. The SCL Group and associated companies are in administration in the UK. Obviously, the process is being managed by the administrator, and I have no further involvement.
So the assets of the company are in the control of the administrator?
That's correct.
And is that the same with, I hear someone a device. There's no photography allowed in the room for members of the gallery, and if people can't respect that, then I'll ask that they leave the room. I hope I don't have to make that statement again. Is that the same with SCL Group as well? Are their assets in the hands of the administrator?
That's correct.
Obviously, you'll have seen reports in the newspapers today suggesting that you took a $8 million sum of money out of Cambridge Analytica before it went into administration. Is that correct?
Well, I saw that newspaper article today. What I can say is that the allegation made in that article is false. The facts of that article are not correct. Other than that, I can't speak to it simply because it alludes to other matters that I'm not so familiar with. What I can say is that over the last 3 months since this media storm erupted, I have personally invested, unbeknown to anyone except the board, millions of dollars to meet staff salaries, staff bonuses, and staff redundancies.
Could you say when was the last time that staff members at SCL or Cambridge Analytica were paid?
I can't speak to that because, as I think this committee knows, I was suspended from my role as CEO and then resigned from the board, and so these matters would have been handled by the board and then the administrator.
So the money that you say you've put in to meet staff payments, is that money you gave to the company or to the administrator? And when did you make those payments?
To the company.
To the company. How long ago was that?
Well, I'd be happy to circle back to you once once I have more facts about this article, but I don't think that this is relevant to this committee hearing.
I just want to give you the chance to respond to what was in the article, and just finally, if I could ask, has the administrator been in touch with you about this, about that amount of money that was taken from the company?
No, he hasn't.
Okay, thank you. Paul Farrelly.
I just it's in line with just the current state of play, really, because it's right to give the opportunity here in public to respond to the continuing media storm. Did you you said that you'd put money into the company? You used the word invest to pay staff salaries and bonuses. Was any of that then redeemed in any way?
By myself?
Yes. Did you receive any of that back?
No, I did not. My intention was to try and help the company through a difficult period when obviously we were uncertain about what was happening, and I was also keen to try and help the staff as much as I could. And obviously at that time none of us envisaged that this outcome would happen.
So not a cent of that has come back to you?
Not a cent.
Okay. And how did did that place you as a creditor of the company, or how did you invest the money? Did you loaned it to the company?
Well, again, I don't think the details of that are important, but given that the company has no assets, being a creditor to the company is probably not so important.
And obviously aside from the financial asset, are all the assets of the company, including data it holds, other information that it holds that has a commercial value, is all of that in the hands of the administrator?
That's my understanding.
Could you just one final question on some of the events that transpired affecting the company directly? At the time, after the publication of the story in the Observer newspaper, Facebook sent lawyers and sort of forensic data staff to the offices of Cambridge Analytica. They were asked to leave by the Information Commissioner, but things were also removed from the offices by Cambridge Analytica itself, or under the direction of Cambridge Analytica. Could you tell us what was going on at that time, and what was removed from the building, and are those documents, files, whatever it was, data sets, have they been made available either to the administrator or to the other relevant authorities that may have an interest in them?
Could I ask you, Mr. Chairman, what makes you presume that anything was removed from the office at that time?
Well, there were photographs of boxes being removed and things being taken out. This has been reported on. So, if that's not the case, I'm very happy for you to say that's not the case. But
I just wanted to check that that's where you were getting your information from.
Yeah.
So I also saw those photographs. My understanding is that those photographs were from personnel who worked in a different office on a different floor that had absolutely no connection to do with Cambridge Analytica or SCL, and that the media simply interpreted this in the way that they thought was most beneficial to them.
But you can say, as far as you're concerned, there was no documents, files, computers, anything removed.
I can tell you
the
categorically that the people or person in those photographs was not part of Cambridge or SCL, and those boxes were not ours.
Yeah, and otherwise, apart from what was brought in the media, there was no other removal of documents, information, computer files, whatever it may be, from Cambridge Analytica's offices during that week.
As far as I'm aware, the ICO were the only people to remove documents and files and hardware from the office.
At all, during that period of time. So they didn't get a warrant to go into the offices until the end of that week. But in that week, I think as far as you're aware, nothing was taken from the offices.
As far as I'm aware.
Yeah. Thank you. Joe Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. The Channel 4 undercover footage of you and Mark Turnbull discussing what work you did. I just wanted to ask you, now that it's some weeks on and in view of everything that's happened, how you feel about that. Do you feel embarrassed about it?
Well, clearly. That was for me to get carried away and try and impress someone who I thought was a bona fide client who'd come to us with a very genuine and serious project to help the people in Sri Lanka with health and IT infrastructure solutions, to then get entrapped into talking about the sort of things that we did was not only deeply embarrassing, but it's something I regret enormously because of the damage it caused to the company and ultimately to my staff and the impact that it had on them. I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
So you're not embarrassed about what you told them, so the bribery and the honey traps and the fake IDs and the websites and the extortion. You're embarrassed about the impact it's had on your reputation and on the jobs of, I think it's 80 people, isn't it, who worked in the business?
More than that, if you count the US, of course. No, that's not what I said at all. What I said was that clearly by speaking with such exaggeration and hyperbole, I didn't represent the company properly. I didn't represent what we do as a company or as individuals, and that in doing so, obviously, there was a significant impact from that. I go on to say that there were some 5.5 or 6 hours of meetings that took place with this individual. Ostensibly, these were very legitimate meetings about legitimate subjects, that obviously all of these were recorded and they were condensed to maybe 6 or 7 minutes of footage, and even those minutes of footage were heavily edited to portray the worst possible picture of the company and myself and my colleagues. And very
But that worst possible picture, Mr. Nix, was word for word what you told the journalists. So, you know, you gave them that information, you gave them that evidence. I was just interested to understand, you know, how you feel about it now some weeks on. I mean, obviously the statement...
That clearly we did obviously say those words, but the context in which they were said has been massively altered, and also the caveats that we attach to those words has been altered. And let me just illustrate, if I may, for a moment. My colleague was absolutely crystal clear in telling the undercover reporter that we're not in the business of fake news, we're not in the business of lying, making stuff up, we're not in the business of entrapment. So we wouldn't send a pretty girl out to seduce a politician and then film them, please, if you don't mind, in their bedroom and then release the film. There are no companies that do this. There are companies that do this, but to me that crosses the line. And if I may go on, if I may go on, please.
The question, Mr. Nix.
When the undercover reporter put these issues to me,
please. It's my job to ask the questions. It's your job to answer them. If you could just do me that courtesy, please. So Mark Turnbull said that. I accept that entirely. I've read the transcript. But then you go on to say about beautiful Ukrainian girls, and you give examples of what you would be doing. And I've referred to them before: bribery, honey traps, fake IDs, extortion, fake websites. You were suspended by Cambridge Analytica. The company put out a statement saying that your comments do not represent the values or operations of this firm, and his suspension reflects the seriousness with which we view this violation. So what are the values? What were the values of Cambridge Analytica?
Well, I will address your question, but let me.
No, please answer my question.
But let me continue by saying.
Please answer my question, Mr.
I
Nix.
caveated my comments very, very clearly by saying the answers are hypothetical, and that's really important. Please don't pay too much attention to what I'm saying. I'm just giving you examples of what can be done. And of course this was edited out of the video. I was asked a very leading question, a hypothetical question about what sort of tactics could be employed to discredit a politician. And I answered hypothetically, and I caveated my answer by saying, please don't pay too much attention.
So
now, of course, this was edited
please,
from
which is,
the
what were
footage.
the ethics, what were the values of Cambridge Analytica?
Well, look, at that meeting we had a client that we thought was bringing a very interesting contract to the company, and the client started taking the conversation down a completely uncharted avenue, and in our overzealousness to secure a contract, Mark Turnbull and I were guilty of hyperbole and agreeing with the client on matters that not only have we never involved ourselves in before, but we had no understanding of. We were just telling the client what we thought he wanted to hear in order to find out exactly what his intentions were and to move the contract forward.
So I've just been passed a case study from your website that says, from the brochure, your brochure, marketing brochure. As part of an election campaign that turned nasty, we launched a targeted digital attack on the opposition candidate. Within 3 weeks, every single reference to him on the first 2 pages of Google referred to the candidate's horrific track record of corruption, coercion, rape, allegations and victimisations. Are those the ethics? Are those the values of Cambridge Analytica?
Well, if you have a candidate that is being found guilty of corruption or guilty of rape or other such things, pushing those into the public space is in the public interest, surely.
What are the ethics and what are the values of Cambridge Analytica? Did you have any at all? I mean, if you didn't, just tell me. But I'm interested to know, did it have any business ethics or values?
Cambridge Analytica is a company that's predominantly staffed by very young, very ideological and very talented individuals who come from a broad range of political ideologies and interests, and who genuinely have been working to understand how they can use data to make the world a better place on many different levels, both obviously by contributing to developing communication and how that's used, also in the social and development sphere, in counter-terrorism, counter-radicalization. There are huge areas of positive work that I could point to, but instead the media, and it seems this committee, are intent to focus on this one meeting which was clearly not representative of the values nor the ethics of the company.
Okay, let me move to Mr. Mallin's, Julian Mallin's QC report into Cambridge Analytica. You mentioned young, idealistic employees of the company. Would they be the same employees that Mr. Mallin's talked to, who described you as delusional, that you should have been reined in a long time ago, that you and Mark Turnbull were behaving like teenagers desperately trying to get a deal? Are those accurate assessments of you and Mr. Turnbull?
Well, I think that the quotes that you're referring to were in their response to that particular Channel 4 investigative video. And I think that they're quite right in their criticisms. As I think Brittany Kaiser said in her testimony, she didn't recognise the company that was portrayed in that video. And I think the staff were rightly very disappointed by the fact that under the very skillful manipulation of the journalist, he was able to coax us into saying things that neither represent what we do, nor the values and ethics that the company holds.
So why say them?
Well, clearly, if I could have the meeting again, I would have it differently. You do appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm sure you won't take exception to this, but it goes to the very heart of your credibility in terms of both your business reputation and your evidence to us, that you will say those sorts of things when you're telling us actually they're completely untrue.
Well, I hope in due course and over time that I will be judged by my actions and not my words, because clearly in this case my words were foolish.
Thank you.
Clear, I'm obviously on the Channel 4 investigation, there was quite a lot of focus on the reference to the Ukrainian girls. I'm sure you'll remember that. But what you said there was, you said, they are very beautiful. I find that works very well. So that wasn't a kind of hypothetical. That was saying, I find that works very well. So was that just a lie to impress the people you were talking to, or was it something else?
That was just a lie to impress the people that I was talking to.
Joe Stevens, I mean, I think what's interesting to us is whether this is out of character with the company. Joe Stevens mentioned the QC's report the company commissioned. In that, he says that if there was, if this sort of thing happened, then you probably find examples where politicians who were on the opposite side of a campaign that SCL or Cambridge Analytica was involved with would be exposed in some sort of sex scandal. And he said, from what he'd seen, that hadn't happened. But that isn't true, is it? Because in 2015, the Prime Minister of St Vincent was caught out in a sex tape scandal, and he was on the opposition side of a campaign that your company was involved with. Isn't that correct?
I don't believe that is correct.
I've got a copy of the newspaper report of the scandal itself. St Vincent and Grenadines Prime Minister comments on sex tape. The party that you were working for is the NDP, and they said that they had nothing to do with it, but nevertheless the sex scandal took place. So the QC obviously who wrote your report wasn't aware of that particular example.
And nor was I aware of that, Mr. Collins. That's the first time I've learnt about that. And I'm not sure that we will, and I will revert to you on this, but 2015, you say?
That's when that's the article I have here. Maybe earlier than that, but
so if I'm going to say to the committee, and I will circle back to you on this, but I can say with a high degree of certainty that we were not involved in that election in 2015.
Okay, we'll check as we go on. That's the date I have on this article I have in front of me. I think the piece of work itself may have been earlier, but I think it may have been 2010. But we'll double check that. But
sure.
You've not heard of that story, but I mean that seemed to be, to me, that seemed to be a case where the QC may not have been aware of the breadth of some of the work that company.
Look, I'm sure that any of the committee can point to a politician involved in a sex scandal, but that doesn't automatically mean that because I got entrapped by a journalist that we were responsible for it. I think you're drawing a connection that doesn't exist.
Well, no, I was just referring to what was in the QC's report, because he was saying that, that if there was any example of a candidate being on the wrong side of a SCL or Cambridge Analytica campaign to be exposed in a sex scandal, that might suggest that maybe there was some credence to it. It wasn't just something being said for the benefit of the tape or to impress a new client, but actually this sort of thing had gone on.
Well, look, let me make this absolutely categorical so that we can put this to bed. There is no credence to it. We've never undertaken any work that involves a honey trap or the use of sex scandal or anything like that, or tried to create a sex scandal for political leverage or for work on a campaign. I can't be more blunt or plain than that.
I've seen also a document that was presented by you to some potential clients in Mongolia, I think in late 2014. This is not about honey traps, but just about other forms of what the document calls proactive campaign intelligence, which it says can provide, including investigations, stings, infiltrations, designed to shed light on the opposition and to better anticipate their strategy. Is that reflective of the sort of work your company does?
Well, I'm not familiar with that document, but the answer is no. We simply, in 2014, we probably had 6 or 8 staff in the company. Most of them were 25 to 35 years old. They came from either political consulting or from academic backgrounds. We had not even the wherewithal to be able to undertake any of that work, even if we'd wanted to, and we wouldn't have wanted to, and we never have. So
is there as we go through an emerging pattern that in documents that are being presented, in interviews that you were given, rather well, interviews, but when you're recorded talking to Channel 4, that you're saying one thing to your potential clients about what the company does, but in reality you don't do any of those things. You don't do infiltrations and stings.
Well, look, I think you need to be
traps.
careful about making sweeping statements.
Well, infiltrations and stings are two words that are in a.
There was one interview,
so.
and it was very leading, and the questions were deliberately opaque, and they led me down a certain road, and I've already apologised to the board and the shareholders and the employees, and I'm very sorry. I can say to everyone that that I was so foolish to fall for a trick like that, but it was a trick, and it doesn't represent what we do. And it wouldn't be fair to characterise me or the company by that one incident.
Well, I'm not trying to do it by that one incident. I think I'm sure this will be something we look at as we go through the questions this afternoon, is whether actually what you said what you were recorded as saying on Channel 4 News reflects the sorts of things that you say. It wasn't a one-off. Those are the sorts of things you say to potential clients. Those are the sorts of things that get put in pitch documents to potential clients, stings, and attempts to acquire information about opposition candidates so they can be exploited during the course of a campaign, whether that is something that you routinely talk about when you meet new clients or whether that was a one-off. I think that is pertinent to understanding whether the Channel 4 thing was an aberration or whether these sorts of untruths are told routinely, or indeed whether some of this sort of work goes on. Rebecca Powell.
It was just to pick on that the note that you've raised here, Mr. Chairman. It does seem strange that you're now telling us this was just all a little mistake and an aberration, and you shouldn't really have said these things, because actually in that Channel 4 document, you yourself certainly you referred to SCL as the largest political consultancy working in the shadows, and there are actually, you're quoted as saying how you use the method of going to meet a potential incumbent and having video evidence of what they had done so that you could basically pop it on the internet, and then they might be accused of corruption. They'll offer a large amount of money to a candidate to finance this campaign in exchange for land, etc., etc. It seems to me very odd that you're now saying you didn't at any time in any of these involvements you had practiced what I might call the dark arts.
Well, let me start by saying that there's nothing more sinister about what you've just read out than what Channel 4 were undertaking themselves. So,
but they're actually your words that we're quoting back to you. And another thing you said,
but does that mean that Channel 4 also work in the dark arts?
It's too good to be true, and make sure it's videoed so that you could use it later.
Mm-hmm.
It does seem really odd that you're now saying none of that was true and you weren't practicing these dark arts.
Well, so let me clarify. First and foremost, I was drawing a very particular distinction about what Mr. Chairman was talking about, which was the use of honey traps and the use of what was the other word you used? I can't remember.
Infiltrations.
Infiltrations and things like that. We don't do that. We haven't done that. And I think that most of this committee would recognise that there is a difference between honey traps and infiltrations than for instance, what Channel 4 would call an exposé.
Ian Lucas.
Mr. Nix, when you last gave evidence to the committee,
Mm-hmm.
you may recall that I asked you about ethics,
Mm-hmm.
and in particular whether the company had ever refused a proposal
Mm-hmm.
from a client in connection with an advertisement or a film on ethical grounds.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you'd go away and
Mm-hmm.
come back to us. And we have received a response from you which says we cannot find an example of where we have had to refuse to put out an advert on behalf of one of our clients. Isn't that a clear example that you have not applied an ethical approach to the advertisements that you've put out on behalf of Cambridge Analytica and SCL?
Well, that's certainly one interpretation of that. Alternatively, you could simply say that that is an example of where we haven't had to employ those sanctions because we haven't had been asked to undertake anything unethical by a client.
There were some films about the Kenya election that were featured in the Channel 4 film, which I think your colleague actually referred to as being effective. Are you saying that at no stage have any of your clients used unethical advertisements or communications?
So this was an allegation, I believe, that was made by Mr. Wiley about the fact that we disseminated unethical media content in the Kenyan elections. I think that subsequent to that testimony, what we've seen is that the actual company responsible for producing and disseminating that was an American-based political consultancy, digital consultancy, who had no relationship to Cambridge Analytica whatsoever, and that it was simply convenient for Mr. Wiley to imply that we had disseminated that when actually we had nothing to do with that campaign. We weren't involved in that particular set of adverts or TV commercials or whatever they were. And I believe a spokesperson for the campaign has also exonerated us from any involvement in that.
Mr. Nix, isn't the truth that Cambridge Analytica cannot produce a single example of refusing a proposal from a client for an unethical advertisement, and therefore Cambridge Analytica was an unethical company itself and didn't apply high ethical standards.
Well, I just don't think you can draw that conclusion from your statement. I think you'd like to draw that conclusion because I think it fits with a certain prejudice which has been prevalent in the media but has not been borne out by evidence. I've certainly haven't seen any evidence that supports this, obviously, apart from this Channel 4 entrapment video. And so I don't agree with what you've said. So the answer is no, it's not true.
You produced no evidence of Cambridge Analytica rejecting an advertisement on ethical grounds.
That is correct. But that does not mean that we are unethical. It simply means that we haven't worked or been asked to disseminate unethical advertising.
Thank you.
I think Mr. Lucas was referring to as well on the case of the video, the extreme violent video related to the Nigeria campaign, was that SCL were running the campaign, AIQ were asked to disseminate it, and what AIQ told us was they refused to do so. They didn't say that the video didn't exist. They said that they refused to have anything to do with disseminating it. Now, we only have their word to go on for that, but that was the evidence that they gave. So I think that's the reason why Mr. Lucas asked that question.
There were two incidents. One was in regards to Kenya, and the other, which I've addressed, I hope, to your satisfaction, and the other was in regards to Nigeria. Now, when I appeared before the committee last, I was unaware of that video. I still haven't seen that video, so I can't speak to its content. But I did obviously listen carefully to the testimony of Jess Sylvester. I also read the testimony of Brittany Kaiser. And then I've spoken since to other employees who were in the company at the time. And again, this was another allegation that stemmed from Mr. Wiley against the company's unethical practices. But what has become clear, or what is absolutely clear to me, is that that video was not produced by SCL Elections or Cambridge Analytica. Not only did we not have the in-house capability to edit or produce videos, we certainly didn't have that capability in Nigeria for the team that were on the ground. And that my understanding is that that video was presented to us by the client who asked us to disseminate it, and that a discussion took place between the members of the campaign team, some of whom were SCL, some of whom were subcontractors like AIQ, and a decision was reached not to disseminate it. Now, I can't speak to this directly because I never went to Nigeria on this campaign, but that's my very clear understanding from the other parties and members of the company that I've spoken to. So at the time when you asked me that question, Mr. Lucas, I wasn't aware of this. I am now aware of this, so I now can point to a video or a client campaign that we were presented with that we didn't disseminate on.
When did you become aware of that? Why didn't you tell the committee this before?
Because when I came in front of the committee on the 27th of February, that was prior to Brittany Kaiser's testimony and Christopher Wiley's testimony and Jeff Sylvester's testimony, and I wasn't aware that this video even existed.
But in your response, which was subsequent to you giving evidence, you, on this specific point, you still didn't produce an example. First time we've heard about this today.
Well, look, my apologies. I mean, I'm telling you now. That response, when did that response come to you? Was it before Brittany's testimony? I really
Your
can't
response was
remember.
before Brittany's testimony.
So there you are. There's the answer to your question.
I know there's some other questions on Nigeria we want to come on to, but I think we'll make a bit of progress, and then I know that people want to come in. Chris Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. It just struck me listening to the testimony a little while ago that you were a bit unlucky with that Channel 4 video, weren't you, Mr. Nix? Because of all the business pictures that you've done and that you've done ethically, and the one that you did unethically was the one that was recorded.
Well, I don't know that I was unlucky. I think other business meetings are not steered by an undercover reporter who's deliberately trying to entrap you, and therefore they never, the conversation never moves into those areas and towards those subject matters. So it wasn't luck. It was a very deliberate and coordinated programme of deception by Channel 4, together with other newspapers, where they, deliberately seeded questions to elicit certain answers. So I don't think luck had anything to do with it.
But that's the business, of course, that you were in, wasn't it? It was behavioural change by deliberately seeding people's thoughts.
Well, look, I know that the committee would like to believe the media's impression that we're this large, nefarious, multinational company that influences politics and other things around the world. The truth of the matter is we are a very small advertising agency that happens to work across a number of sectors, one of which is political campaigns, which only constitutes about 25 or 30% of the revenue of the business, where most of our time is spent selling toothpaste and automotives and things like that.
Just if I can come back onto the question of substance in this session, Chairman. You've told us previously that in respect of the organisation WikiLeaks, we have no relationship with WikiLeaks. We've never spoken to any WikiLeaks. We've never done any business with WikiLeaks. We have no relationship with them. Period. Full stop. In this country. Does that remain the case?
That remains the case. Right.
I see that this afternoon there's an article on the Guardian website suggesting that Brittany Kaiser, when she was a Cambridge Analytica director, was visiting Julian Assange in February last year and was told friends that it was to discuss what had happened during the US election. The article also goes on to say that she had also claimed to have channeled cryptocurrency payments and donations to WikiLeaks. Is that correct?
I simply cannot speak to that. That is the first time that I've heard that. I haven't read the article. I had absolutely no knowledge of the fact that Brittany Kaiser had met with Julian Assange. I cannot speak to the veracity of that reporting. If it's anything like the majority of the reporting that newspaper has said about our company, I can only be sceptical about the truth that it's based on.
Their source is visitor logs from the Ecuadorian embassy obtained by The Guardian and an organisation that I don't know called Focus Ecuador. So it sounds as though if the visitor logs are correct, that it might be the case.
It might well be the case. You're probably better off speaking to Carol and asking her directly.
I might do. It's just that I couldn't ask her before because the session had already started, for which I apologise for.
No, I really have never heard this before. This is completely new to me. But I'm assuming that Brittany did that in a personal capacity. It certainly had nothing to do with Cambridge Analytica or SCL elections.
Right. The one concern about that is obviously she'd be doing it on your time, and also that's the second instance now following on from what my colleagues have asked, where things are being gone in the company that you weren't fully aware of. Are you a little bit concerned that perhaps you didn't have a complete grip on the activities of your colleagues in terms of what they were doing around the globe?
Well, if you're asking me if I micromanage 120 staff in offices across the US and the United Kingdom, such that I understand how they spend every minute of every day when I myself am travelling extensively, you're absolutely correct.
But in terms of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, who obviously is a very high-profile individual and has undertaken some fairly high-profile publication of leaks, including those that are used for political embarrassment, and we've seen that from the United States, for example. It might have been useful, particularly since you had work in the United States, if you'd been aware of that.
Well, look, I don't know how I can say this more clearly. I wasn't aware of it. I didn't know that Brittany Kaiser had been to the embassy. I can't speak to her motives. I can't speak to what she was doing. She certainly wasn't there representing Cambridge Analytica or SCL.
Okay, thank you.
Just on regarding Julian Assange, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about Brittany Kaiser's evidence to us, which I'm sure you've seen. Can I just ask, did you hire Brittany Kaiser personally to come and work for your company? Was she someone you knew before she joined the firm?
Well, I was introduced to her personally, and then she would have been interviewed
in the usual way.
As other
Yeah.
candidates for a job.
She obviously knew Julian Assange before she came to work for you. She spoke about that, and in particular through her relationship with the legal chambers that represent him. And she said that you knew that she knew Julian Assange as well. I just wanted to ask you whether that was correct.
Well, it's certainly correct that that Brittany Kaiser had worked, I don't know for how long, in human rights for the QC John Jones.
Yeah.
And I believe that he represented
Yes, indeed, that's correct.
Julian Assange at some point. So whether she knew Julian Assange directly or had ever met him, I can't speak to that. But I knew that she had a relationship with John Jones.
But so you were aware of that connection and the connection then on to
That is
Assange,
correct,
yeah.
yes. I've met John Jones myself once,
Yeah.
yes.
Because it came up in Brittany Kaiser's evidence because you spoke to us about Julian Assange the last time you came, saying that you made an attempt to reach him via, I think, a speaker bureau or some other
That's
agency
right,
that represents it. But given that you knew Brittany Kaiser had a route into Julian Assange, at least through his legal representation, why didn't you just ask her if you wanted to get a message to Julian Assange? Why did you go through that convoluted route?
Well, actually, one of my colleagues put that question to me the other day, and the answer is, I really think this demonstrates how much of a spur-of-the-moment idea it was to reach out to them. It wasn't something that was thought through. As I think I told this committee last time, very plainly, I read an article in the Guardian, I believe it was, that Julian Assange had access to these emails, and I simply reached across to my colleague and said, would you mind seeing if you can contact him to see if he'll share these with us? That was the extent of it. We didn't sit down and strategize this. We didn't think it through. She very kindly followed up for me, and 10 days later we got a response saying no, he wasn't interested.
But your motivation was to seek to gain access to the emails that Julian Assange had, the Hillary Clinton emails, in order to benefit your client, the Trump campaign.
Well, I don't think we'd really thought it through that far. I mean, I think the point was
I don't think you were going to read them and hand them back.
These were very contentious emails, potentially,
Yeah.
and we wanted to understand, as did every journalist and I would say most political consultants on both sides of the aisle in the United States, what was contained in them. I don't think that curiosity is indicative of anything nefarious.
I was just asking just to clarify what the motivation was.
Sure.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Nix, in February when you appeared before this committee, you said that you had no relationship with Aggregate IQ, apart from using AIQ to develop some software.
That's correct.
Would you like to reassess your original answer now, in light of what we've heard in the last few months about all of this?
Well, I think, and I think I want to double check. I think the question was, do you have a relationship with Aggregate IQ? To which I answered no, because we do not have a relationship with Aggregate IQ, and we have not had a relationship with Aggregate IQ for many months, or indeed for well over a year or year and a half. And so I was absolutely correct, and I stand by that. I then volunteered some additional information to you to help you understand that we had a relationship with Aggregate IQ. Principally in 2014, they built a software platform for us.
Which platform was that?
Well, internally we used the name Ripon for it, but in addition to that, they also worked as a subcontractor to our firm on a number of projects which involve building other very small or smaller pieces of software, and also they undertook some digital marketing for us.
And if we're talking about the Ripon platform, can you tell us a little bit in detail of how that was built?
I couldn't speak to that. Do you mean technically how the code base was put together?
Yeah.
No, I can't.
Who it was available to and that type of thing?
Well, look, I can speak to that, certainly. Look, we used Aggregate IQ as an independent company of specialist software engineers to help us build what was called a voter engagement platform. The easiest way to think about this is a piece of software that allows you to visualize and manipulate data so that you can make decisions based on those data.
And what was the intention of using that data, of using that Ripon platform? What was
Well, the intention was to be able to provide this as a tool to clients to be able to use, so that they could identify and target audiences for campaigns.
Okay. And where would they have got the data from to use in that programme?
Well, the vast majority of data that was used in this platform was a combination of voter registration data, which is something that's commercially available in the United States, and consumer and lifestyle data, which again is something that you can go out and commercially acquire or license from data vendors.
Okay. So the tech website Gizmodo revealed the entire code base for Cambridge Analytica's Ripon platform. The security firm Upstart revealed the integration of Cambridge Analytica and AIQ through another base code. Why was so much of your source code kept in such unsecure locations?
Well, firstly, that source code was written, as I have just made clear, and developed by AIQ, and so you'd have to address that to them. It would have been their responsibility to keep that code safe. But that
Did
code...
you not have any oversight on that?
Well, we tasked a subcontractor to build us a product.
But I would have thought data
we
security
tasked them
was
to
quite
do that
important.
because we didn't have the capability or wherewithal in-house to do that. So, therefore, for us to be able to micromanage or police that at that time would have been difficult, certainly. But I think more importantly,
for what information did they give you, or what did you ask them to make you satisfied that data was secure? Which
well, I think there's a confusion here, and I want to explain this as best I can, given that neither of us are technical software developers, but
I might be. I'm not, yeah. But
well, the confusion seems to be that this code base was the same as the data that was contained on the platform. My understanding from the article, which we both seem to have read, and from the evidence that Chris Vickery gave, was that the code base pertained to the platform. It was the code for the development of the platform, and it was only part of the code, not even the entire code base. It was just a small piece of the code, is my understanding. There is no correlation between the code base for the platform and the data that went into it. So the best way to explain this, using a metaphor, would be that AIQ were tasked to build a car for us. They happened to have left a door lying around that somebody found, but possession of that door does not necessarily, does not at all give you access to the petrol that's put into the car. Does that work for you?
But do you think it was acceptable that the source code was in such unsecure place?
Well, look, there's nothing, other than the fact that it's our IP or IP that we've commissioned, there's nothing sensitive or put at risk by the code for a program being left on an open forum. And indeed, many developers choose to leave their code in open forums so that it can be shared with other developers for the benefit of the good of the community.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think your analogy is quite straight. I don't think it's quite as straightforward as that, though, is it? Because what we've seen is evidence of effectively joint project working. People at AIQ and SEL having access to the same databases, working on the same databases. It wasn't as simple as AIQ just being hired to design tools that the rest of the company use. People were working together on the same data on the same campaigns. Well,
my analogy was very specifically to illustrate the point that Ms. Elliott was making in regards to the code base that had been left on the internet. So I think that it could be better, but I think that was a fair analogy. But your point stands, Mr. Chairman, which is after they'd built the software platform for us, AIQ continued to work with us as consultants, not least to help some of our clients to interface with the product that they built and to teach them effectively how to use it.
But I think AIQ worked with you before they built Ripon. They worked in Trinidad.
That's correct.
First engagement.
That's correct.
And I believe you were introduced to AIQ by Chris Wiley. Is that correct?
That is also correct.
And you obviously were very impressed with them because after meeting them, they're very quickly involved in an important campaign for you. Well, why was it you were having met this? I mean, people have said, people have said some fairly disparaging things about Chris Wiley in terms of his role in the company, but he introduced you to AIQ and you hired them pretty much straight away. Would that be fair reflection of what happened?
Look, I don't think that's fair at all. I mean, first let's talk about Chris Wiley. Chris Wiley had an absolutely instrumental role in the company. I mean,
it's not what it says in the QC's report that your company commissioned. It basically makes him sound like someone who was a kind of like intern, freelancer.
Well,
had no significance at all.
I think those are the facts of the matter.
What you said now, what the QC said in his report.
Well, the facts of the matter are that Chris Wiley was on a Tier 2 student visa. He was limited to working 20 hours a week, I believe. You'll have to check that. And as such, he could only work 2 days a week or so at the company, which is probably why Mr. Malins alluded to him as a part-time or a consultant or an intern or whatever he said. But that's not to undermine his value. Chris Wiley's brought some very significant value to the company. Not only did he introduce us to AIQ, but he was also the person responsible for introducing us to Dr. Kogan. He was the architect of that relationship and the idea of asking Kogan to collect data and to use that sort of data on modelling personalities. And then he went on and managed that relationship right up until the point that he left the company.
Okay, well, I think what you said there is probably a fair reflection of the value you brought to the company than what was in the QC's report.
Well, I can't speak to the QC's report. It was independent.
Well, it was commissioned by Cambridge Analytica. So AIQ worked in Trinidad. They then engaged to design the Ripon system that you've described. They work on campaigns, for the campaign work that was done for John Bolton's PAC. In the election races in America in 2014. They're then working on Ted Cruz campaign in 2015. Jeff Sylvester said to us that probably 80% of their revenue from beginning of 2014 through to the start of their work with Vote Leave was with SCL. And I think many people would say that they were, during that time, their teams were totally integrated with yours, and that whilst they may be a legally separate entity, they were effectively part of the same team. Isn't that the reality of the situation?
Well, certainly not in my mind. I never considered AIQ part of our company. They were a subcontractor who was brought in over a period of time to undertake very specific tasks for the company. They came in, they undertook a piece of work, such as building the Ripon platform, and then they left. And then possibly later they would come in and undertake a different piece of work. So the answer to your question is no.
But they have access to the same data during that period of time. So they're not just because I think that's why what you want us to believe, I think, is that they are just designing discrete tools. They make those tools, they give them to you, they go away again. They might come back for another project. Now they did design and create a very important tool, the Ripon tool that you've described. But other than that, they're working continuously with SCL, sharing data, helping improve targeting of campaigns, helping to run and execute those campaigns. And did you have any kind of policies in place? Because if they're a separate company, on what protocols or rules did you have in place around data sharing? Were there agreements signed with them on data sharing and data handling, given they were handling your company's data?
Well, I think that you are not correct when you talk about data sharing. AIQ are a software engineering company, and Cambridge Analytica was a data analytics company. They built a product, and if we go back to my rather trite analogy of the car and the petrol, they built the car and we put the petrol in. Now, the petrol that was put into the car was not raw data, it was modeled data. They would not have had access to the raw data. And the only way that they could have had access to that data, other than in their work that they were undertaking for us, would have been if they'd taken a copy of these data illegally, and obviously in against the contracts that they were bound by.
But you see, the raw data wouldn't be much use to them anyway, would it? Because their job is not to handle the raw data, it's to turn the profiles that have been created by the algorithms your company worked with, and then use that and then turn those profiles into customized audiences, and then to execute advertising campaigns. That's what they do. So to do that, they have to have access to all the profiles.
That's not what they did, because that's not, their role in regards to Ripon was largely to maintain the platform and to work on the platform to ensure that it scaled, that it didn't have any bugs, that if the client requested a particular functionality, that they could then do that. So their role was very much a functionary role in order to make sure that this platform that they built for us was a usable tool for clients. Yes, I mean, that's it, really.
Well, I think if that's the case, then I think
that is the case.
What surprised us is that in looking at, we're doing some work looking at evidence Chris Vickery's given to us from the AIQ files he found on GitLab, which shows evidence of both people, employees of SCL and employees from AIQ having access to the same data sets. Now, we'll see if there's more evidence of that, but that would seem to sit at odds with what you said to us, because there'd have been no need for that if people weren't working on data sets that were being used in common.
Well, look, I don't really understand the thrust of the point that you're making, but maybe I can colour this in a different way. It would not be unusual for us as a firm to undertake data analytics on behalf of our clients where we would be working on their data. Sometimes we would take receipt of that data to work on it, and sometimes we would work within a client's own firewalls, say a bank or somewhere where the data is more sensitive. Just because we're working on clients' data does not, and therefore we have access to the data that we're working on, does not mean that we have a right to that data, we can make a copy of that data, or otherwise own that data. It simply means that we are a contractor working on clients' data, and that was the relationship with AIQ.
But there certainly don't seem to be any kind of policies in place in terms of the handling of data. And you talk about them not having access to raw data that was gathered by SCL. Just for the record, could you just explain what that raw data would include, what data sets? I know you've given talks and presentations about the methodology that Cambridge Analytica has used, but what sort of raw data would be processed by SCL?
Well, I mean, I've just explained to your colleague that these data, and I explained when I was here last time, I think, if you would like to check my testimony, but this is largely consumer and lifestyle data. So this is data on, for instance, loyalty card data, transaction data. This is data that pertains to lifestyle choices, such as what car you drive or what magazines you drive. I beg your pardon, what magazines you read. It could be data on I don't know, consumer habits, and together with some demographic and geographic data, and obviously the voter data, which is very important for US politics.
And Facebook, don't forget Facebook.
Well, obviously there's the GSR data set, but I think you need to understand that that data was in the grand scheme of things, was really a very, very small component of the larger data set.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to move on to that subject now. Paul Farrelly.
Thank you very much, Chair. And just before we do, can I just clarify one thing, because these newspaper reports have been very, very recent. When you appeared in February, and so much has gone on since, you made the distinction between Cambridge Analytica and SCL Elections and the SCL Group as separate entities apart from certain common shareholdings. But it is the case that all of the SCL companies have now gone into either Chapter 7 or administration, is it?
That's correct.
So as far as the SCL Group companies are concerned, has it been the case that what's happened with all the media publicity surrounding Cambridge Analytica and SCL elections, that the whole SCL brand has been toxified and therefore extinguished?
Well, look, as I've already stated, it's certainly the case that all the SCL companies are in administration.
But the SCL group was carrying out defence work, wasn't it?
That is correct.
Traditionally. But what's happened with your side of the your companies has so made the situation so toxic that the shareholders have decided also to put SCL Group into administration.
Well, look, this was a commercial decision based on the negative press and the allegations that have been made against the company, many of which have now been proven to be false. But as a result of these, the board decided that the company was no longer a viable going concern and decided to put it into administration.
Those are the different boards of the different companies?
Indeed.
Okay. I just want to come on now to where I think you left off in your opening comments. I just wanted to. It's regarding the relationship between your company or companies and GSR and Alexander Kogan. When you came to us in February, the chair asked you this question: does any of your data come from global science research company? You answered GSR. The chair said yes. You then said we had a relationship with GSR. They did some research for us back in 2014. That research proved to be fruitless, and so the answer is no. The chair then asked you, they have not supplied you with data information. Your answer again was no. And the chair then asked again, your data set's not based with information you've received from them. Again, you said no. The chair, at all. And your final response was at all. So since then, we've had some rather conflicting evidence from Dr. Kogan himself, from Christopher Wiley about what data was supplied and used. Indeed, Mr. Wiley described that data obtained via the Kogan app from Facebook as the foundation data set of the company, and which may have collected data on up to 87 million users. And also clearly there's been action by Facebook following these revelations or allegations. So do you want to, I think you were perhaps going to do it in your opening statement, do you want to clarify or amend now the evidence that you gave in February with respect to data supplied by GSR and Dr. Kogan?
Thank you. I'm grateful for that opportunity. I certainly would like to continue with the very short statement on this, and so we'll do that, and then we can move on to questions from there. Look, clearly I accept that some of my answers could have been clearer, but I assure you that I did not intend to mislead you. It was my firm impression that Mr. Collins' questions were focused on whether we were currently in possession of data from GSR following the research they'd carried out, and which I was very clear in telling the committee about. My belief was and remains that we deleted all such data licensed in good faith from GSR under that research contract, so I answered no to his questions on the topic. When I read the transcript, it became clear that Mr. Collins was also asking about whether we had ever been supplied with such data. Of course, the answer to this question should have been yes, but my focus was on whether we still held the data from GSR research, which is the issue that Facebook had been most concerned about. There was certainly no intention to mislead the committee. The fact that we received data from GSR was already in the public domain from as long ago as December 2015, when The Guardian published an article detailing Cambridge Analytica's relationship with Dr. Kogan. There was and is no need to hide this fact. Indeed, on the 20th of March, 3 days before the committee first raised this specific inconsistency, I appeared on Newsnight and made it clear that we'd licensed research data from GSR. I also stand by my evidence that we do not work with Facebook data, and we do not have Facebook data. The only Facebook data we ever received was via GSR and Dr. Kogan, and that was subsequently deleted at Facebook's request. At the time, we had no reason to believe that data had been provided to us improperly by GSR.
Okay, so you, in short, you misunderstood the chairman's questions.
When you look at the transcript, it's very plain, or it's certainly clearer what the chairman was asking. When you listen to the video, and I have several times, the conversation is much less clear, and indeed we spoke over each other, and he did ask about whether we had data from Kogan. He then reiterated that point, and then he returned to that point, and that was my understanding, and it was a genuine misunderstanding.
For the record, I will have the transcript in front of them. I did ask you about, I said, does any of your data come from a global science research company? You said GSR, just to clarify. I said yes. You said we had a relationship with GSR. They did some research for us back in 2014. That research proved to be fruitless. So the answer is no. I then said, they have not supplied you with data or information. You said no. Your data sets are not based with information you've received from them. No. I said, just to clarify, at all, and you said at all. So I think there's no ambiguity in the exchange there, I don't think.
At all. Our data sets are not...
data sets or information?
Or information, yes, are not informed by that data because it was deleted. Okay. So,
Chair, that's exactly the same exchange as I've just read out, so Hansard will have it now in duplicate. Yeah. So you misunderstood he was mixing his tenses up and you misunderstood the questions, and you were talking over each other. So why didn't you just take the opportunity later just to write and clarify with your follow-up supplementary information?
Because I don't believe that when I submitted the supplementary information, and you can certainly correct the timeline, that inconsistency had been flagged.
No, but you flagged it yourself.
Beg your pardon?
You flagged it yourself. You've read the transcript and realised that...
oh, I did not read the transcript until after it had been flagged by this committee. So after, whenever it was, the 23rd of March or something like that.
Still a few months back. So, but you didn't take the opportunity to write and say, actually, I want to clarify what I've told you.
Mr. Farrelly, I've agreed to come in here and talk to you in person.
Well, you've now given an account of it. Could I mean, clearly it's you might say it's not up to you as to whether to check whether Dr. Kogan was complying with Facebook's terms and conditions, which he clearly wasn't. But the methods he was using, it was a neat trick in a sense, because you could get friends' data and therefore multiply greatly the data you got from people completing surveys. Was that a neat trick at all, which Cambridge Analytica or SCL Elections or any of your companies repeated with respect to any other surveys that you did directly, which involved any logging in at the end on Facebook?
So, unfortunately, and as you will recall from my opening statement, there are some topics that, as much as I'm wanting to talk about them, and willing to talk about them, I'm simply not able to, because they refer to live investigations. And unfortunately, this is one of those topics. I think you're all aware that the ICO is conducting an investigation at the moment, and so I'm not able to speak to any matters in relation to GSR and to that project.
Just to make clear, that's your answer, but the Information Commission has made clear to us, and I believe to your representatives, that they have no objection to you discussing these issues today.
Well, I'm sure that they don't, but you know, the Information Commissioner's office took advantage of my parliamentary privilege the last time I appeared here to use my testimony to this committee as part of their application for a search warrant of our premises. And so, whilst in theory, this privilege exists, clearly it's open to abuse.
It depends what you say, I suppose. But
Well, it shouldn't depend what I say. It's either a privilege or it's not.
well, it's not open to abuse. I mean, if they are interested in something you've said and they therefore wish to talk to you about it, that's a matter for them. But I mean, if you're declining to answer those questions, that's a matter for you. And if you're doing that under advice, I understand that.
Thank you.
But just to make clear for the record, that the ICO themselves don't feel that you answering these questions would in any way jeopardise or prejudice their investigation.
Well, look, the committee should be reacting to findings from the ICO and not the other way around. And
We're completely separate bodies. I mean, there are very clear sub judice rules that apply and that prevent us from asking witnesses questions related to matters before the courts. This isn't currently a matter before the courts. We did, as a matter of procedure, seek evidence, seeking guidance from the ICO themselves. So that was their guidance to us. You've given your answer to Mr. Farrelly. There's nothing more to say about that, but I think it's just clear for the record that as far as the ICO is concerned, they don't have any concerns about you answering any questions on that topic.
Thank you.
Sorry, Paul.
Okay, I just got one final question on this strand, really, but I think that the refusal to answer the question will be taken in the record as meaning it was a relevant question to ask you, Mr. Nix. But can I just ask and again, this is again a question with relation to potential use of data, which you may feel you don't want to answer, and it's really just a question to try and exemplify your approach to data. You had a staffer from your companies working on data from Breitbart, which has got a strong connection with Steve Bannon, I understand. Was that how was any data gathered from that secondment to Breitbart, and if so, how would that have been used by the company?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to help me understand. You're saying that one of my former employees went on to work for Breitbart?
No, you had someone seconded, I understand, to Breitbart.
I don't believe that we did.
You didn't?
I mean, I don't believe that we did. I can't. It's certainly. I can't think of anyone who was seconded to Breitbart, and I'm certainly not trying to mislead you in this regard.
Just a suggestion,
but I haven't heard about that before. No.
Okay, then you can't answer it. Chair.
Rebecca Powell. Chris Vickery's kindly just sent us a message relating to the AIQ data, just on whether they had access to raw data, raw SEL data or not. And he says that based on the work he's done looking at the AIQ files, that it was almost certainly accessible. The usernames, passwords, network locations were all present, and that anyone who had access to the AIQ GitLab store could have had access to all the SEL data that they'd worked with. And I noticed as well that from the email exchange that we published, the document given to us by Chris Wiley that relates to the Bolton Super PAC work as well. There's an email that's sent to AIQ that lists a series of next steps to be undertaken during the campaign, and in that, one of the items in that, it says AIQ needs 2 days to push all information made available to them into a form that can be accessed and used in the platform. Therefore, all currently available data would need to be ready and sent, provided to them by the close of business on Saturday UK time, so they have the weekend to do what they need to do. We know as well, obviously, from Facebook that they found evidence of shared audience files on SCL and for SCL and AIQ campaigns that they'd run, where there was an 80% correlation in the members of those audiences. And AIQ said to us that they'd been given audience data by SCL. I mean, are these things that you were aware of? Because if they are, I'm not sure that the answer you gave to us was truly reflective of the nature of the relationship between AIQ and SCL.
Well, I think what I explained to you, Mr. Chairman, was that I think the example that I gave you was that it wouldn't be unusual for SCL or Cambridge Analytica to work on a client's data sets, whether it was a bank or a corporation, and to have access to the data whilst we were working on them, but that didn't entitle us to have any privileges over that data or any wherewithal to make a copy or retain any of that data ourselves. The relationship with AIQ would not have been dissimilar to that, where as a subcontractor who was brought in to assist us on projects, they would have had possibly access to some of the data as it's indicated there, whether that was model data or otherwise. But again, that would be covered by the contract relationship that we have with them.
That's fine, Mr. Nixon. Are you saying they had, you said that they would have had access to model data or otherwise, including raw data? It's clear that they did have access to raw data.
Well, I can't answer that with certainty, but again, I don't want to mislead you, because I did speak to my technical team, my data team, prior to this hearing, and they assured me that there was no raw data that went into the RIP-On platform. So again, I can only defer to their expertise, and again, this could be a topic that we could circle back to you on.
Yeah, but again, there's a difference between raw data going into the RIP-On platform, which you almost certainly wouldn't have done, and raw data being accessible to AIQ, which it looks like which it certainly was.
But based on what Chris Vickery says.
Yeah, and I think based on that, what's in that email, based on other evidence that we've seen, that data is being.
Well, that email doesn't suggest doesn't suggest raw data. It could certainly suggest model data.
Well, we've seen both in Chris Vickery and other evidence that we've seen from the AIQ files that we've had a chance to look at is shared access to raw data. And Chris is saying that it's certainly technically possible, is what he's saying. It certainly would have been easy for anyone to do that.
The premise remains whether. So let's agree that we need to establish what data they had access to, but regardless of that, that doesn't give them any rights to that data, as it wouldn't any contractor working with anyone else's data.
I'm not saying they did, I'm just saying you said earlier on that they had no access to raw data, and that seems to be a matter of dispute, and I think even you are now saying that that's not a statement you could stand by.
I was told very firmly and unequivocally that no raw data was put into RIP-On. And so I stand by what I was told, but what I've agreed with this committee is to circle back to you and confirm this point.
Who puts data into RIP-On when you're working on that? Will AIQ put the data into RIP-On?
Data scientists, I believe.
But who do they work for?
For Cambridge, well, for SCL Elections or Cambridge Analytica.
So they're okay. Rebecca Powell.
Mr. Chairman, Rebecca, sorry, do you mind if we take a break for a few moments, please?
Could I just ask one very quick question, because I'm afraid I have to leave the committee for a second.
I'm very happy to
very
take
quick.
a very short break. If Rebecca Powell could ask her question, I believe it's quite short.
And
then
just
we'll
very
take a break
short
then.
point. One was you said, Mr. Nix, you were going to refer back to your team. I just wondered what technical team that was, because SCL is in administration, is it not?
That is correct.
Fine.
But I still
just for
have a relationship
that was all. I was
with
just
some of my colleagues. I can obviously ask them in as a friend for their advice.
Okay. And it's just a few points relating to your last appearance here, where we dealt a lot with Facebook and those surveys on Facebook. Mm-hmm. This is where a lot of our discussions actually began, which seems like a long time ago now. And at that first meeting, where we talked about those surveys and that had a Facebook login at the end, and you said that if they had a login, it didn't mean that your personal data was then going to be accessed by Cambridge Analytica, but Brittany Kaiser told us that the purpose of the surveys was to gather information, and that by competing it with your login, Cambridge Analytica would also get access to your data. I just wondered whether you might just like to change your mind and amend your comments about that.
Well, I also was surprised by Brittany's answer. She is also a non-technical person, as am I. I did discuss this with my technical colleagues, and that they assured me that my original testimony reflected what was the case. And therefore, what I would like to do, because obviously I don't want to run the risk of misleading this committee, is to agree to circle back to you on that point. But my understanding is
quite
that
nice if you could
no
just
data.
Come up with an answer now.
My understanding is that no data was collected, but again, I'd like to confirm that, because obviously we don't want to have a miscommunication.
That's a pity, and I just wanted to clarify one other thing. You told us at that first meeting that Cambridge Analytica did not work with Facebook data. Those were your exact words. I think they might have been to me, actually. Do you want to change your view on that? Would you just like to put on the record, in the light of everything else that we've heard since, whether you change your mind on that?
Well, I think the point that I was making there, well, actually, again, this is, sorry, I must stop myself from continuing, because, again, this is, again, another topic that unfortunately falls under the investigation by the ICO. So we're going to have to let that investigation play out before I can address that.
And just my final point, something that you mentioned earlier, you said very little data would have been collected anyway, but Brittany Kaiser referred to 87 million people having their data gathered in this way.
Well, I can address that because this is in the public domain, and I urge you to revisit the testimony of Dr. Kogan, because I think his testimony was a very fair reflection of what happened, and that is in contrast to people who weren't necessarily so involved, such as Brittany Kaiser. But I think what Dr. Kogan made amply clear was that whilst he collected data on potentially 87 million people and a great deal of data, that Cambridge Analytica SCL Elections only received data, and a very small amount of data, on about 26 or 27 million individuals in the USA, and that the only person to receive the entire data set, not just in its entirety in terms of all the people that it included, but also all the data which it included, which I believe Dr. Kogan said was about 96% more data, 96% more data than that which Cambridge Analytica or SCL Elections had received, was Christopher Wiley for his company Unoya. Now, I think before we have a break, this would be a good opportunity just to talk about that, because a lot of the allegations, in fact, I'm going to say 90% of the allegations that then gain traction in the media have actually all come from a single source. They've all come from Christopher Wiley. And I think it's really important that this committee understands that and understands the motivations behind this and what was going on at the time. So if you'll permit me, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background, because I think it's very relevant and extremely important, where so many allegations have been made and so many of them have now been proven to be false, that you understand what is going on here.
Can I just interrupt you there? Just on Christopher Wiley, when you were talking about him just now, I think you suggested he was just on some kind of simple student's visa, but he told us that he was on an exceptional talent visa. So you're dissing him with all these comments, but he was clearly, in his own mind, a very intelligent man.
Look, no one has suggested that Mr. Wiley is not intelligent, least of all me. I think I stand by the fact that when he worked with Cambridge Analytica and SCL Elections, he was on a Tier 2 student visa. The reason I stand by that is because I applied, or my company applied, for that visa. So if he went on to change his status at a later date after he left me, I can't speak to that. What I can tell you is that Christopher Wiley was at the company for 10 months. He was instrumental in defining the relationship with Kogan and for being the architect of that particular program of data gathering. And as the company grew and started to undertake business with the methodology that he felt that he had designed and was the architect of, he grew more and more resentful, and to the point where he was openly discussing with clients that he wanted to replicate SCL Elections or Cambridge Analytica without Nix, i.e. without me. He also stated things like he wanted to create the NSA's wet dream. He had his own ideas about a company that he wanted to build. And at the time that he left us, which I believe was in around June or July 2014, he'd already set up a company called arg.us. And he developed a pitch which he took to Silicon Valley to raise $15 or $20 million for some 20% of his company. What was clear was that he was totally agnostic about where the money came from, and even courted Russians, stating that he found the idea of working with crazy, evil Russians quite intriguing. One San Francisco-based investor who spoke to Wiley about his startup in 2014, please.
No, sorry, Mr. Nix.
But declined to invest. It's very important. How this is relevant. It's very relevant because most of the allegations that have been put to this committee stem from one source. They've gained traction in the media, and if you don't understand why these allegations have been made, then they're going to be given unnecessary credibility. And it's important.
Your assertion is not true, that the only evidence that we have about the work Alexander Cogan was doing, the significance of it, it comes from what Christopher Wiley has told us. It comes from documents that the committee have received, contracts that you signed with GSR that bear your signature.
Sorry, that's not what I said. What I said was most of the allegations that have been made against my company come from one source.
The issue was you totally glossed over when you came. You could have chosen to give a more honest and more full answer to the questions you were asked. I asked you about your relationship with GSR when you gave evidence before, and you didn't mention any of it. And
you would appreciate, Mr. Chairman,
you wanted us to believe that there was just a very small, as you said, small, short-term academic project that had gone nowhere. And yet what we have is not Christopher Wiley's opinion, but facts, documents detailing the work that was to be done, what was to be paid for it, what it was to be used for, not on an ad hoc basis, but commissioned to support elections being run in specific states in the United States of America, and how you'd remunerate it. That's what we're basing our questions on, and our questions to you about whether you were clear with us, not just what Christopher Wiley has said, but by evidence that you don't dispute and that is in the public domain.
You will remember that at the time that I appeared before you, the issue of Facebook data, the issue of GSR and Cogan, was not a sensational news story.
You didn't tell us about it. You didn't tell us about Facebook.
Yeah.
When you came in.
Actually, at that time, the thrust of your inquiry was in a completely different in a completely different area, and that's where we were focusing. You yourself only asked 3 questions on it out of 200 or 250. It wasn't an important topic, and I gave it as much attention as you gave it yourself. There was not an intention to obfuscate. As I told you earlier, my relationship with GSR was already in the public domain, and of course that is why I came back here to clarify that. Clearly, things have changed in the last 3 months.
But things have changed for us because we've actually seen evidence. At the time we didn't. So you're quite right that I asked you 3 or 4 questions about it. We won't read them out for a third time, but I think I think it's pretty clear what I asked you and why I asked you. We'd actually asked we'd asked Facebook the same questions about Cambridge Analytica having access to Facebook data when we took evidence of them. We also feel that Facebook were not open and honest with the committee in the answers they gave to us that day, and we've challenged them about that too. So I think there's fault on both sides, but I think what we asked you was pretty clear, and you chose not to talk about any of this, and it is documents that we've seen, not just Christopher Wiley's testimony, that lays out for everyone to see the nature of the work that Alexander Cogan did, why it was important, and that work was based on the data that he acquired from Facebook wrongly, and that's Facebook's view that they acquired it wrongly. And the figure of 87 million, as you know, is a figure that's been verified by Facebook itself.
Can I address that? Continue to address the point that I was making before, because
not if it's going to be
I think
sort of.
It is
I think
relevant.
we know your views on Christopher Wiley.
Well, I don't
the purpose of this hearing
do.
is not, and you're free to make that statement anywhere you like. I think, but that's not the question you were asked about. I gave you quite a lot of latitude, but I think it was quite clear we were going into your character analysis of Christopher Wiley and his motivations,
I'm going into the
which I don't think is relevant to this.
The fact that he set up a competing company to undertake exactly the same work that Cambridge had been set up to do, using actually a much, much, much larger data set to target the same Republican clients that he has said that he's so ideologically opposed to, and then went around America pitching his business. My point being is you have an individual who's purporting to be a whistleblower, who in fact was motivated to come forward because he didn't agree with the political parties that we were working for, when he was pitching exactly the same political parties all over America, including Donald Trump's campaign itself, who was purports to be a protector of data and data sovereignty and everything that goes with that, who actually acquired a significantly larger data set than us, a materially larger data set, and then went out to actively try and commercialize that data set in a very similar way or exactly the same way that we did. And so therefore really doesn't care about data sovereignty, and who has spent the last 2 or 3 years, having left the company and watched the success of the company getting bitter and jealous, and has now been using this to bombard us with a raft of allegations, which many of which are now proved to be untrue.
The purpose of these hearings is to put these questions to you based on subsequent evidence we've received since you last gave evidence to us. You know, that your views on Crystal Wiley, I think, are pretty clear, and you're free to make those statements wherever you like. You know, the purpose here is to ask you questions based on the evidence we've subsequently received, and that's what we intend to do. Rebecca, have you finished your Paul Farrell?
Just if you'll permit me,
should we take that break now?
This is on this point.
It's on this point. If you'll permit me, Chair, so that Hansard now has this little section in triplicate this time round. What you said with regard to the relationship with GSR in the exchange with the Chair included the statement that they did some research for us back in 2014. That research proved to be fruitless. Mm-hmm. Now, that statement is not any misunderstanding. And when judged by the evidence that has subsequently emerged, your clarification notwithstanding, that was simply not true.
Well, I believe you're familiar with Dr. Kogan's testimony, which echoes that sentiment, which was that the data that Dr. Kogan gave to us was model data, and building a model on top of a model proved to be less statistically accurate. This is again echoed by, or was said by Kogan, than actually just using Facebook's own algorithms for placing advertising communications. And that was what we found out. So I stand by that statement. I stand by that statement that I made to you before, and that was echoed and amplified in much more technical detail by Dr. Kogan.
This it's an interesting exercise in semantics, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's a fact. The fact is the data that we received wasn't fit for purpose, and that's why we abandoned that data long before we deleted that data from our servers in accordance with Facebook's wishes.
They did some research for us back in 2014. That research proved to be fruitless, and yet it was the basis on which the foundation data set, as it's being called.
According to whom?
Well, I've made it clear those are the words of Mr. Wiley.
Mr. Wiley.
Yeah,
so
but
it's funny how all your evidence seems to circle back to one individual, Mr. Farrelly.
It doesn't actually, because
it wasn't the foundational data set on which we built our company, because we went out and we licensed millions of data points on American individuals from very large reputable data aggregators and data vendors such as Axiom, Experian, Infogroup. That was the cornerstone of our database, together with political data, voter file data, I beg your pardon, which again is commercially available in the United States. That was the cornerstone of our company, and on which we continued to build the company after we realized that the GSR data was fruitless.
Well, let's not trade semantics. You told us that they did some research for us back in 2014. That research proved to be fruitless. But you attempted to use the products of that research in your political activities on behalf of clients in the United States. The fact that it's been alleged that actually it wasn't worth the computer it was stored on later does not mean that what you told us was not really had any real relationship with the truth. What you were trying to do was to minimise your downplay your relationship with GSR, and there are other relationships which you've consistently downplayed, but have come back here now to clarify in an interesting way when your account has been challenged by the evidence that subsequently emerged. Isn't that the case?
That's not the case, and I urge you, whilst I take a break briefly, to revisit the testimony of Dr. Kogan. He was extremely articulate in explaining how this data was modelled and its application and its usefulness. And maybe if you familiarise yourself with that, you'll understand that coming from an eminent academic in this area, that the data was ultimately fruitless.
But I think what Mr. Farrell is getting at is, and this is what it says in the contract that you signed with Dr. Kogan, is that when you enter into that agreement, all parties believed, that's what you were paying for, was that Facebook likes could be analysed and were an accurate predictor of behaviour and interests of Facebook users, and that Dr. Kogan's job was to acquire Facebook likes from Facebook data, both of the profiles of people that engage with this survey and of their friends, and that data will be combined with other data sets, including US voter registration data that you gave to Dr. Kogan as part of the project, that he delivered that project for you, not just the scoping work, but the full-scale project. There was then a second contract signed with Dr. Kogan where he continued to do further work linked to American elections that year in 2014. And so whether your models changed or you and Dr. Kogan took a different view at some point in the future, that there was a better way of working, you've made your views clear on that. But I think given the substance of the work that was done, to say that the relationship was fruitless and the work was fruitless certainly doesn't reflect your view on that at the time, because this was a very substantial piece of work that was done. And I think it's obviously of material interest to us because of the evidence that people have given to us about this. And I think very important to our investigation. And I think Mr. Farrell is right to say, and we've challenged Facebook in the same way, that when we asked these questions initially, I think people sort of gloss over something that I think, in fairness, they should have disclosed. But we'll take that break now and resume. Thank you.
programme of targeted donation solicitation using digital advertising and other media as appropriate to raise funds for Leave.eu in the UK, the USA, and in other countries. I mean, when that document was drawn up, did you take any legal advice as to whether what you were proposing there would in fact be legal?
Yes, we did actually. We took a considerable amount of legal advice, and at the time it was suggested to us by our counsel that we could target British nationals living abroad for donations. I believe, and I'm not a lawyer, as you well know, that there is still some lack of clarity about whether this is true or not. In any event, in the absence of a firm decision to proceed by legal, we did not proceed, not that we won the contract anyway.
Okay, so by that you meant British nationals living in the USA and
I
other
believe
countries.
that was the intention. Obviously, I wasn't involved, as you know, in any of these pitches, but that's how it was explained to me at the time.
Okay. As I say, I don't want to dwell on Leave.eu, but I do want to talk about UKIP, because subsequently, and you'll have seen this this invoice, it was invoiced not to Leave.eu, but for £41,500 to the United Kingdom Independence Party. And in her evidence, Brittany Kaiser, who was involved in the pitch, told us that it was decided that while Leave.eu didn't possess much data, we could begin with an engagement for the UK Independence Party, which we did. We took receipt of their membership and survey data. Now, to anyone in politics, if you were going to do some work on it, given the characters involved, a starting point would indeed be perhaps the canvas data and anything else that UKIP held. But UKIP's a political party, isn't it?
That's correct.
So how does that work square up with the statements you made to us about your lack of any interest in getting involved in UK politics?
We're really scratching around here, Mr. Farrelly. We've been working, or I've been working in this company for 15 years. At times we undertake 8, 9, 10 national elections a year somewhere around the world. We've never undertaken an election in the UK, so I stand by my statement that the UK was not a target country of interest to us. Obviously, the referendum was a unique moment in international campaigning, and for that reason, it was more significant than perhaps other opportunities to work on politics and political campaigns in the UK might have been, which is why we explored it. But we didn't work on that campaign either, as you well know.
Well, I was. I hope I wasn't scratching around. I was really just comparing what you told us with the evidence that's subsequently emerged, and you clearly felt that the work that you'd done, irrespective of whether you were successful because Leave.eu was not successful, was worth £41,500, and you build the UK Independence Party.
Well, look, I think this has been covered very extensively by the Election Commission's office and was covered in my previous testimony. We undertook some scoping work to look at these data. Unfortunately, whilst this work was being undertaken, we did not agree on the terms of a contract. As a consequence, the deliverables from this work were not handed over, and the invoice was not paid. And therefore, the Election Commission was absolutely satisfied that we did not do any work for Leave.eu, and that includes for UKIP.
Well, it doesn't really. We talked about Leave.eu before, but now I'm talking about work for UKIP, not Leave.eu, whom you build, and I take it that this invoice wasn't paid, notwithstanding any transfers that may have been later made to UKIP. Do you know what what use was made of your work for UKIP?
Well, as I just explained to you, we didn't hand over any work to UKIP.
That wasn't the question. Do you know what use was made of the work that you did for UKIP?
No. Do you mean by Cambridge Analytica?
No. Do you know what use was made of the work that you did for UKIP?
I'm afraid I don't understand the question.
Okay, it's quite. You well, can you describe what work you did for UKIP then?
Well, I believe that we analysed their membership database to understand the data that it contained, with a view to understanding how that could be incorporated into a wider programme of research and data acquisition to build a targeting model.
So UKIP gave you data to look at?
That's my understanding.
Was any of that data supplied either by you or UKIP to leave.eu?
No, it wasn't.
It was all...
Well, I can't speak for UKIP, clearly.
So as far as you're aware, none of that data went beyond your relationship, not with leave.eu, but with UKIP?
That is correct.
Okay. The final question on now is, Brittany Kaiser told us that you'd also made pitches to Eldon Insurance and Go Skippy, I think is the name. Did any of those pitches come to anything?
So I'm not entirely sure if that's correct. Clearly, again, I wasn't there. But I don't believe
I mean the
that
company.
we actually pitched Eldon Insurance or Go Skippy. I think I believe that Brittany met with them or representatives from those companies, or at least that's what her testimony said. But that's not to suggest that we were pitching them for services to become a client. But again, I don't want to mislead you. You might have to ask Ms. Kaiser to clarify that.
I think she used the word pitch, but as far as you're aware, it didn't lead to anything or any further ongoing relationship.
I don't even recall a pitch.
Okay, thank you.
Simon Hart.
Just sticking on the Leave EU theme just for a moment, and you're right, you were very clear back in February when asked about your involvement, and your actual words were, let me be absolutely crystal clear about this, I do not know how many ways I can say this, we did not work for Leave EU, we have not undertaken any paid or unpaid work for them, okay. Do you stand by those words in exactly that form now?
Yes,
with as much emphasis now as you did then?
I absolutely do, and I feel entirely vindicated by the Electoral Commission's investigation report of 11th of May, which said, and I quote, "The Commission is satisfied that Leave.eu did not receive donations or paid for services from Cambridge Analytica. The evidence shows that the relationship did not develop beyond the initial scoping work and that no contract was agreed between them. The Commission saw no evidence that Cambridge Analytica had any input into Leave.eu's referendum campaign."
Pretty well a repeat of what you indicated at the time, for which I'm grateful. As you know, the committee's published transcripts of tapes of Leave EU strategists, which described your work as, to put in inverted commas, backbone. Nigel Oakes, and I'll quote again, said that you provided proof of concept. What did that mean? What is a proof of concept? And what did you offer? What is a proof of concept?
Who provided that?
In the words Nigel Oakes.
Well, look, Nigel Oakes is a colleague and a friend of many years, but he was not working in the company at that time.
So why would he have described your work as a backbone?
I can't speak to that, Mr. Hart. Nigel ran a different company from a different office in a different country, working on different projects with different clients. He had absolutely no involvement to what we were doing. He had no access to our servers, to our data, to our personnel. To all intents, apart from my close personal relationship with him, he could have been a stranger. So he was obviously speaking to what he'd, I can conjecture that he may have been speaking to what he'd read in the newspapers. I have no idea, literally.
So we've heard as you know, anecdotally and indeed by people sitting where you're sitting, people asking some questions about the integrity of that denial, if you like. And as you know, Andy Wigmore and Aaron Banks will be giving evidence in the next couple of weeks. Do you think that they will give such an unequivocal, sort of sign up so unequivocally to your denial as you are today? Do you?
Absolutely, I do. When I was shortly after I was last here, I believe Aaron Banks submitted a statement to this committee where he timelined and detailed our relationship with him, and that almost exactly reflected the details that you've heard from myself and the details that we presented to the ICO regarding our relationship with various Brexit campaigns. And I want to take this opportunity to point out that this is in stark contrast to the testimony that this committee received, where Christopher Wiley stated, and I quote, "Cambridge Analytica played an absolutely pivotal role in Brexit. That is really important for people to understand." Another groundless accusation and allegation. And similarly, the headline in The Guardian was, and I quote, "A plot by a shadowy global operation to hijack British democracy." It is deeply troubling that this conspiracy theory has gained such traction and caused such irreversible damage to our company.
Can I just go back to Nigel Oakes for a minute?
Yes, of course.
Because you claim he's a personal friend, and don't dispute that. So you're saying that any hint that he has suggested that you provided work which could have attracted a value is simply wrong.
Sorry, any
So
hint?
any work, the suggestion is that there might have been work carried out by you for leaving you which should have been declared to the Electoral Commission because it had a value either as a direct donation or donation in kind. Are you saying that accusation is entirely, or observation is entirely unfounded?
I'm saying that I stand by the findings of the Electoral Commission's report. And
it's not quite what I'm asking.
What you're asking me to do is to make a judgment about Nigel Oakes' statement. And I don't think that it's for me to try and second guess what he was trying to say.
You were happy to engage in some conjecture, just now to use your word rather than mine, about what his motives might have been for making these comments.
Well, I did preface it by saying this is conjecture. I was trying to help you understand that he had no direct access to information or decision-making or documents at the company. Therefore, I can't speak to what he meant.
Leave it there for the moment. Just as an aside, you were creating an impression a bit earlier on this afternoon that Cambridge Analytica was almost being misrepresented as a sort of shady organisation which was capable of affecting the outcome of elections, and actually what you really were sort of toothpaste advertisers, I think was the expression you used. Are you therefore suggesting that you were overplaying your role as an election influencer? Because, you know, as we know, you were going around the world charging large sums of money for a service which you're now saying constituted a rather minor part of your business, and you were in fact much more comfortable in the role of an advertising agency. Which of these is right? It seems to me rather misleading your potential clients.
They're both correct. Obviously, historically, there was a greater emphasis on political business. That was certainly the company that I founded in 2012, but prior to that, the emphasis was much more on the government and defence space, and more recently, as we moved into 2017, late 16, 17, and early 18, the emphasis moved across towards the commercial and brand space. So it was an evolution. As the company grew, we looked at different avenues that we could provide services to.
But you were an effective operator in the election field.
Well,
yes or no? I'm not from your earlier.
We had a demonstrable track record of helping our clients succeed in elections. Clearly, as everyone understands, success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. But over a 27, 26-year period, if you can point to a consistent winning pattern, at some point, in a humble way, you can say, well, maybe we're doing something right.
Thank you. Last question, just a general question really. When it came to the final crunch a few weeks ago when you were suspended as chief executive, who made the call? Who rang you and said, sorry, Alexander, you've got to go? Who made that call? Was it a face-to-face meeting or a telephone call?
Well, it was a decision with the board, and obviously I was involved in that decision. I put it on the table and said that if this is what's best for the company, then this is what we should do. My firm belief at that time was that that the company would survive the initial media onslaught, and that an independent inquiry that was commissioned by the board to understand really the allegations that have been made by the press against the company would prove that they were unfounded, and that in due course we would get back to business as normal.
So it was a joint decision involving the board and you, and for the reasons that you've loosely hinted at, that it was becoming a distraction for the business, something along those lines?
Well, look, I take a huge responsibility for my part in misrepresenting the company. Whether I did that intentionally or rather knowingly or not, and I think we've covered this at some length, that was, it wasn't my finest hour. And I have to accept that, and I'm going to have to live with that. It was, it was a very, very well executed sting, and
you got caught.
Chapeau to Channel 4 for destroying an excellent British technology company.
Were you offered a payoff?
I beg your pardon?
Were you offered a payoff?
No.
But have you had a payoff, or were you offered a payoff in the future? You've received no money for...
well, it's not relevant to this committee, but the answer is no.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. Ian Lucas and then Brendan.
Do you know Mark Evans?
Yes, I do.
Did he work for Cambridge Analytica or SCL?
Yes, he did.
When did he work for them?
Well, again, I don't want to mislead you, but I would say between 2014 and 15, but I'd have to confirm his exact dates.
When did you last speak to Mr. Gettelson?
Early 15, when he left the company.
So you haven't spoken to him since he left the company?
No, I don't believe so. Not a word.
Have you discussed AIQ with Mark Gettelson?
When he was at the company?
Yes.
It's very possible, because as you well know, AIQ were a contractor to us.
You are aware of Jeff Sylvester's evidence?
What specifically?
That Mark Gettelson introduced AIQ to the Vote Leave campaign.
Yes, I am aware of that. That's correct.
So there is a connection between Cambridge Analytica and the referendum campaign and campaigns in the referendum campaign.
Well, if you're trying to suggest that a former employee of mine who I haven't spoken to for 3.5 years, who happened to move on and work in another line of business or businesses that coincidentally worked or were connected with a referendum campaign demonstrates that there was a connection, I would say that was about as tenuous as the connection that Mr. Farrelly was trying to make, and it proves only that in a very small world of political consultancies that there are circles within circles of people who work together and who know each other.
Yeah, it is a small world. Who introduced Cambridge Analytica to Aaron Banks?
Gosh.
Can I help you? Brittany
Yes.
Kaiser says it was Steve Bannon.
That could well be possible. Again, I don't want to mislead you. It could well be. Could well have been Steve Bannon. It was
So were you there when the first meeting took place with Aaron Banks?
I was there. That was the only meeting I attended, was the initial meeting. Obviously, Mr. Bannon was not there. So again, I can't...
Why obviously?
I beg your pardon, because the meeting took place in the UK and Mr. Bannon was in the US. And therefore I can't confirm exactly if that was the connection. But I was at the meeting. There was certainly Mr. Banks, I remember. I can't with any certainty recall who else was there, but I think Brittany spoke about this in her evidence.
So Mr. Banks and Mr. Bannon are two of the most prominent political campaigners in recent years who've been involved in two of the most important referendum and election results, and they were introduced to each other through Cambridge Analytica.
Well, that's not what you've just said. What you've said to me just now was that Mr. Bannon introduced Cambridge Analytica to Mr. Banks. Therefore,
what I'm saying
we
is
could not be the one that introduced the gentlemen to each other.
What I'm saying is this is a very small world in which Cambridge Analytica is a very prominent player, and your assertion earlier on that you have had nothing to do with the referendum is just complete nonsense.
Look, I'm sorry if members of this committee are unhappy with the outcome of the referendum. I'm sorry if members of this committee are unhappy with Donald Trump being President of the United States. But you can't simply put forward your prejudices onto me and make sweeping assumptions about our involvement with a particular campaign simply because that's what you want to believe, because that narrative suits your view of the facts.
No,
the fact is, there is no evidence to support your position. And what you're doing now is you're building a conspiracy theory.
Facts, Mr. Nix, not rudeness. Facts is what we are presenting to you. What we are getting back from you is bluster and rudeness. The fact is that Steve Bannon, from Cambridge Analytica, was someone who introduced Aaron Banks to Cambridge Analytica. And we've had that in evidence from a number of different sources. And we also have a fact that a former employee of Cambridge Analytica was the person who introduced AIQ to the Vote Leave campaign. Those are facts. And that's why there's a link in this story. So all of those facts are true.
But that's not what you said. What you just said was that you refused to believe that Cambridge Analytica was not involved in the referendum. And that is not a fact. And it's not supported by the hypothesis that you've just put forward. It's not supported by the relationships that you've just alluded to. There's absolutely no connection between that statement and what you've just set out.
The connection of the individuals who are linked to each other in this small world in which you operate and from which you've made an awful lot of money. So the position is there are links.
I think we've covered this and
ridiculous line of questioning, if I may add. Absolutely ridiculous.
Well, I think you did say that the claim that Christopher Wiley made is very damaging to your company, that you'd worked on the referendum campaign. But I mean, if Leave.eu had got the designation, you would have worked on the referendum campaign willingly. That was the only reason it didn't happen was because Leave.eu didn't get the designation. Therefore, the relationship didn't go any further. I mean, that's nothing. I'm not saying
the problem with that is
not at all. But you seem to take great exception to even the idea that you might have worked on it or weren't.
No, I take exception to the fact that Christopher Wiley can state to this committee that we played an absolutely pivotal role in Brexit, i.e. can point blank lie to you as he's lied over a great many issues involving Cambridge Analytica's involvement in election campaigns in this country, in the United States and overseas, and all sorts of allegations about unethical practices and illegal practices. And yet I'm sitting here and being subjected to, frankly, ridiculous accusations based on the most tenuous connections that are simply not supported by evidence.
Well, I mean, I don't want to go over this again because we went over this quite a lot last time as well as today. I mean, one of the reasons these hairs started running in the first place was because of statements you made and Aaron Banks made, Andy Wigmore made about the way you'd work together. It's not just Christopher Wiley's view. Brittany Kaiser places a value on the work she did at working with Leave.eu in preparation for the referendum. The Electoral Commission's position is they acknowledge that work took place, but they don't believe it had any value or bearing on the work that Leave.eu eventually did. So I think it's not baseless. I mean, people have had their say, you've had your say on it, but that's where it's come from. Brendan, do you want to come in on this? Or?
It was more following up on what Simon, Mr. Hoare was saying earlier on about the undercover operation with Channel 4. Now, since we've been in session, Channel 4 have issued a very robust statement in reply to what you said, and they absolutely disagree and reject the allegation that they heavily edited the footage to portray you, as you said, in the worst possible light. And they say quite categorically that their comments were used in context, specifically when pitching to the reporter, it was you who said, these are just examples of what can be done, and you followed it up by saying, and what has been done. Now, that's not hypothetical. So you are on the record as saying, these are just examples of what can be done and what has been done. So do you wish to modify your earlier statement?
No, I don't wish to modify my statement. There was no suggestion that they'd been done by our company. I was giving examples of the sort of things that could be done and have been done to damage the reputation of politicians. And that was the question that was put to me. And I answered that question frankly and openly.
So you're absolutely clear that this was not an offer on behalf of your company to do these things, and if it wasn't an offer to do them, why make such a play of it?
I think what I went on to say, and let's have a quick look here, was to make it clear to the reporter that after I said that, I went on to say the right solution will be made for you for the right problem. I didn't commit to doing anything to them. I simply played along and listened to this potential client's desires without committing or suggesting that we would follow through and deliver any of those services.
Surely to any reasonable person listening to that conversation, you were making an offer that this was part of your armoury should it be required. Surely any reasonable person would
Mr. O'Hara, you don't need to sit there and sully my reputation. I've already done that, and it's been broadcast nationally and possibly internationally to millions of people. Okay, so I think we've covered this point. I've apologised for my exaggeration and hyperbole in my interest to win a client contract. I alluded to services that we don't make, we've never made as a company. And yes, it was extremely foolish of me, and it was a very well-constructed entrapment, sting, whatever you want to call it, and Channel 4 got their man. But beyond that, I really can't speak to this any further.
I think the problem that I have with all this is that from where I'm sitting, since you've come here today, you have attempted to paint yourself as the victim here. Now, by no stretch of the imagination can you be seen as a victim. Surely you can see that. You are not the victim here.
And what happens if I was the victim, Mr. O'Hara?
Do you believe you are the victim?
Let's just run with this hypothesis for a moment. What happens if I was the victim? What happens if as we've seen, we were accused of working in Brexit, we didn't work in Brexit? We were accused of disseminating videos in Kenya. We didn't disseminate videos in Kenya. We were accused of, I think, what was it that Mr. Wiley said? He said of capturing governments colonising countries and being part of some white right-wing conspiracy. What happens if none of that is actually true? And that in due course, as some of these investigations are concluded, or more of these investigations are concluded, people realise that actually we were simply the guys who were perceived to have contributed to the Trump campaign and were wrongly accredited with being the architects of Brexit. And as a result of the polarising nature of those two political campaigns, the global liberal media took umbrage and decided to put us in their crosshairs and launch a coordinated, extremely well coordinated and effective attack on us as a company in order to destroy our reputations and our business. And all of this was underpinned by a stream of allegations, unfounded, groundless allegations that came from Mr. Wiley, who gave the media the ammunition that they needed, that they wanted to be able to attack us for something that in the case of Brexit, we simply didn't do.
So you are the victim in all of this?
Well, if you're sitting where I am right now, you probably feel quite victimised.
But the frustration is, that according to you, everything that has been written or said about Cambridge Analytica is wrong. Yet the only thing we've ever heard directly from you turns out, by your own admission, to be a pack of lies. So you can understand the frustration that you deny everything that's ever been written or said about you, and then when you are caught going on the record saying something, your first reaction is, that's all lies. So you can understand, that it's a frustrating position for us to be in, to have to listen and to try and
not half as
search
frustrating a position as it is for me, sir.
But to search for the truth.
Questions you want to come back to? I know we've got time's marching on a bit, and we've got a few other things we want to cover off. So we might, if you don't mind, Brendan, we might move on at that point. Joe Stevens.
Yeah. I'd just like to ask you, Mr. Nix, about the work in overseas elections. You mentioned that any one time you might be involved in, I think you said 8, 9, 10 elections around the world. Because you didn't really talk about that when you came and gave evidence in February, other than the Trump and the Cruz campaigns. So the period I'm interested in is 2009 to 2011, when you were working on elections in St. Kitts and Nevis, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the referendum in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. What was the nature of your business relationship with Dr. Christian Kalin from Henley & Partners?
I was familiar with Christian Kalin because he had work in the Caribbean islands, some of those islands. I know he used to run a citizenship by investment program, certainly in St. Kitts, and possibly in Dominica. I don't know about the other countries.
Okay, so can you tell us a bit, what's this citizenship program? Is that the same thing as
So I believe it's the
or
same or similar to a system that we have in the UK and other European countries, but again, you'll have to explore this yourself, where an individual has a right to acquire citizenship through investment.
Right, and what about passports? Can you do that as well? Or?
Well, again, I don't want to mislead the committee, but I believe that the citizenship can include a passport. So you're basically making investment into the country, and I don't know what the nuance is in terms of how much time you have to live there and things like that. But
so were you working with him when you were doing election work in the countries that I mentioned?
Well, I was certainly I knew Mr. Kalin. I've met with Mr. Kalin on numerous occasions when I was working in the countries, some of those countries that he was also involved in. He was obviously a colleague of some of our clients when we were both working for the government.
So were you working with him? Did you undertake work together in any of those countries?
Well, you mean on citizenship for investment programs?
Well, as part of the work that you were doing, was he involved in any aspect of that work?
Well, he certainly had an interest in the outcome of the elections. He definitely, as a government contractor, had an interest in well, how the elections would unfold.
Yeah, but did he work with you? You said you knew him. Did you do any work together? I'll ask you again.
Well, it's a difficult question because I don't want to mislead you. Of course, he didn't work on any of the campaigns. That would be a ridiculous notion. But he didn't. But he dipped in and out of the island, and I met with him.
To do what?
Well, he would ask me about the election campaign, but we had a relationship.
So you'd meet him, you'd talk about the election campaigns, you presumably told him how things were going for your clients. What was he was getting a benefit, what were you getting from that? What was the purpose of you meeting with him?
Well, I don't really know what you're alluding to here.
I'm not alluding to anything, I'm asking what the purpose of the meetings were from your perspective. You know, you're obviously a very busy man, you travel around the world.
These are tiny countries, and there are not that many people who, certainly foreigners who come in and out and who have an active, ongoing relationship with the government. I think I met with lots of people over that period who had similar relationships with the government.
Did he finance any elections?
He may well have made contributions towards the election campaigns, but you'd have to talk to him about that.
And were they campaigns for parties who were your clients?
I can't speak about his activities, but my understanding is that you may well have financed some of the elections or given contributions towards some of the elections.
Who were
our clients.
Who were clients.
Yeah.
And did you ever discuss his financing in the meetings that you said you had with him?
Yes, but not overtly.
Can you? Sorry, I don't understand that.
Well,
did you discuss it or didn't you?
Yes, we did.
Right. Okay. You said he was a big contractor with governments in those countries.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that where the passports and the citizenship stuff comes in?
Well, I haven't spoken to Mr. Callan for a number of years, many years now, but at the time, I believe he ran the economic citizenship program in St. Kitts, certainly in St. Kitts, and we were involved in the election in St. Kitts.
And so, what sort of people would effectively buy a citizenship or buy a passport?
Oh, I couldn't speak to that. I genuinely...
You never discussed that?
Well, I mean, I don't... people who wanted to have a second citizenship, I guess. People who maybe were looking, and I'm speculating here, but maybe looking for a more beneficial tax regime.
Fine, thank you.
Yeah.
Did you do much work in Latin America? Obviously, you've spoken a bit about the Caribbean, but did you do any work in South America?
A little bit.
Did you do any work in Argentina?
Yes, we've worked in Argentina.
Who was that for in Argentina?
Well, I think, as I said last time, we don't generally like to talk about specific clients, simply because there's a client confidentiality there.
Sure. I saw a side of a note about some of the work in Argentina, that it was an anti-Kirchner campaign. So you were working for one of the opposition parties or someone seeking to change political leadership in Argentina. Would that be correct?
As far as I'm aware, and I again could circle back to you on this, I don't believe that we've ever worked on an anti-Kirchner campaign.
Okay. I'm just looking at a note that someone's shared with me. It's a summary of a management meeting at SCL Group from the 27th of May, where there's a note on Argentina and it says anti-Kirchner campaign, AM presented to decision maker awaiting feedback.
Right.
So that suggests that you did present an anti-Kirchner campaign to someone who might be in the market for buying one.
Well, no, that would present that maybe I pitched for such a campaign.
Yeah, an anti-Kirchner campaign. Yeah. So, so clearly that was the meetings were around that premise that it was an anti-Kirchner campaign. So you're working for an opposition party or some other person interested in influencing politics in Argentina wasn't supporting the government.
That would be the appearance of that.
Yeah. Have you ever worked with Paul Singer? Was he funded any of your work in
No,
in
I
Argentina?
never worked with Paul Singer.
Okay. There's one question I just wanted to ask as well about, someone showed me a copy of a note that was prepared, that was submitted to the decision maker in Argentina, and it just talks about the nature of SCL's work, and it said our management team consists of retired intelligence and security agency officers from Israel, USA, UK, Spain and Russia. Is that the case, that you have former intelligence and security agency workers from Russia who've worked with SCL?
No, that's absolutely not the case. Am I able to have a look at this note or not?
I'm probably not able to share it, but because if the person who gave it to me is happy for me to share it to you, I'm happy to
Sure.
circle back, as you would say, on that, and do so. I'm probably not at liberty to share it, but Russia's been included on that list of countries, and but have people, Russian nationals, worked for SCL in its work, or for Cambridge Analytica?
No, as far as I'm aware, and I think I was pretty adamant about this when I saw the committee last time. We've never worked with a Russian individual. We've never worked for a Russian client. We've never worked in Russia, certainly not since I've been in the company.
Or had Russians work for you?
Or had Russians work for us.
Apart from Alexander Kogan?
I believe he's a US national.
Okay, but I think from Russia originally.
But I believe he's a US national.
Okay, fine. Okay,
So-
but that's the distinction. That's fine. I'm not seeking to assert anything. I'm just making a point. And did you know he was
But
working?
what point are you making?
Well, I was also, actually, did you know that he was working when he was working? Did you know that he had links with Russian universities? He conducted research work at St. Petersburg University, funded by the Russian government. Was that something you were aware of?
I believe I met Alexander Kogan twice.
Yeah.
Once in January 14 and once in September.
Okay.
I had a lunch with him twice.
Okay.
That was my relationship.
So just something else I wanted to just clear up on a different election area. It's something we've had different conflicting bits of evidence about. This Nigeria, and we touched on this a little bit earlier on. I don't want to go over the issue of the film. I think we've covered that. But there is this interesting, of interest to us anyway, issue of intelligence workers, Israeli intelligence workers, who were brought in to work alongside the SCL team who were delivering the project in Nigeria. Brittany Kaiser spoke a bit about this in her evidence session, that there were people from Israel that came on to work on the project that she'd been introduced to in Israel, that she believed were former intelligence officers. Are you able to tell us anything about that? Are you aware of Israeli intelligence officers or former intelligence officers working as contractors alongside SCL in Nigeria?
So again, this is another groundless accusation that I believe was made by Mr. Wiley. Unfortunately, having read his statement to the committee, he suggests that this is something that's been reported to the authorities, and so whilst it would be honestly very tempting to try and talk this through with you, this is another one of those areas that I simply can't discuss.
The note Channel 4 gave us in the transcript of the sessions that they filmed you in those meetings, and I think conversations you'd had with Channel 4 reports afterwards, you said that we used some British companies, we used some Israeli companies, and that you'd said that one of the Israeli companies you'd used was Black Cube. Is that correct?
No, I think the transcript, because I did read this, he said, was it Black Cube? Have you worked with Black Cube? And I replied, yes. I was totally mistaken. We have never worked with Black Cube, and we have been contacted by Black Cube after the publication of that what do you call it, expose by Channel 4, and we confirmed to them in writing that we had no relationship with them and we'd never worked with them. And they obviously were keen for that because their name was used.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously the accusation was made, you've given your response to that. If you haven't worked with Black Cube, have you worked with other Israeli intelligence officers, or former intelligence officers, to support SCL's election work?
Not knowingly, no.
So it may have happened, but you don't know if it did.
Well, I mean, sorry, I don't want to be trite, but you could be an Israeli intelligence officer. It was the point I'm trying to make, is I have not knowingly contracted with any intelligence officers from any nationality to work on projects with them.
I understand that, but the point I was making was whether other people in the company could have contracted them, but you wouldn't have been aware of it, or would you have been aware of it?
No, I'm sure I would have been aware if someone was making a hire, regardless of whether they were hiring a Israeli intelligence officer or someone else. I'm sure I would have been aware.
So you would have known who Brittany Kaiser hired to work on that campaign in Nigeria?
Well, again, I can't speak to this, but what I can say, because I did read Brittany's evidence, is that she was very clear in saying that the client had hired some third parties to work for them, and that was nothing to do with Cambridge Analytica.
Well, that's what the
that's what I read.
The report, the QC report.
No, I believe that's what Brittany Kaiser's testimony says
as well. Is that there was a parallel operation that wasn't anything to do with SEL. But what Brittany suggested to us was that she was introduced to some people in Israel she believed were former intelligence officers, and that they came to work in the team. She didn't necessarily know who they were, she couldn't remember their names, didn't know which company they'd come from, but nevertheless that they'd been introduced and she brought them in. And there seems to be a bit of confusion around exactly who these people were and whether SEL worked with them on other campaigns as well. It's been suggested to me by former SEL employees that they then went on to work on further campaigns in the Caribbean as well. Were you aware of that?
Look, I can't speak to what happened in Nigeria because I wasn't there. All I can say, and the only thing I can say on this, is we have never contracted with anyone that fits that description. And we certainly did not contract with those individuals or in any way offered work, remuneration, services, or have any relationship with them whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important, not just because of the question of were the Israeli intelligence officers and is that relevant, but obviously, as you know, the accusation is that they were brought in to work as hackers to gain information, hacked information on the opponent in that campaign.
Look, I can't speak to this, but again, this is another accusation that I believe came from Mr. Wiley, and it was the first we'd heard about it. I'd heard about it. No one in my sorry. Brittany Kaiser said.
Pretty well. And I would say it has been put to us by other people, former SEL employees as well, that they believe these people were hackers. And so it's not just Christopher Wiley's testimony. Obviously, I can't disclose who these people are. They don't wish to be identified. But you've given your answer. I think that's.
I stand by my answer.
Yeah. Thank you. Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Nix, who are the side group?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know, other than the fact that I read an article in Bloomberg about 3 weeks ago about them, and that article suggested a relationship with SEL Group in the USA.
So you have no knowledge of side group other than what you read in Bloomberg?
That's correct.
You've never met with them?
Never.
Do you know the nature of the work that they're involved in?
No, I don't. I read in the article, as you probably did as well, that there was a joint pitch to the US government for some work, and that was the first I'd heard about it.
And it's categorically not true that Cambridge Analytica or SCL or any of the other companies involved that you were involved with have any relationship whatsoever with Side Group?
No, I didn't say that. I said I'd never heard of them before. I can't speak as to... it was the first time I heard about them was in that article, and the article suggests that SCL had a relationship with them, SCL Group in the USA, our defence contractor, and that they joint pitched. I cannot confirm or deny whether that is true. I've never heard of them before.
Okay. Well, it's not just Bloomberg, but the Wall Street Journal on May the 23rd reported that Cambridge Analytica had formed a joint venture with Side Group. They are a private intelligence firm in order to win US government contracts immediately after the 2016 presidential elections. Is that correct?
Well, I've told you very plainly that the first I heard about this company was in this newspaper article. I can't speak to it more than that.
So Cambridge Analytica, you're telling us categorically, have not worked with Psy Group.
No, that's not what I'm saying, and I don't know if you're deliberately trying to misinterpret
I'm
what I'm saying.
deliberately trying to get to the truth.
What I'm saying is the first I'd ever heard of the name Psy Group was when I read these articles. The article infers a relationship with SCL Group, and I cannot confirm or deny whether that relationship existed because I'd never heard of Psy Group before reading the article.
Okay. What advantage do you think there would be to SCL or Cambridge Analytica, who you said yourself are a very small advertising agency, working with Psy Group, a company who are reported as being founded and managed by an experienced group of former high-ranking officers from elite units of some of the world's most renowned intelligence agencies? Why would a very respected journal, such as the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, connect a very small advertising agency to a company like that?
So just for the sake of clarity, because facts matter, we're talking about SCL Group, which was the US defence contractor, which is different to Cambridge Analytica, which was a political and commercial communications agency. And I cannot speculate as to what the advantage would be of joint pitching on a contract, other than to say that it's possible that whatever the contract was, it required a range of skill sets, some of which could be provided by SCL Group and some of which could be provided by Psy Group, and that neither agency had the requisite skill sets to pitch on its own. The US defence procurement process is extremely protracted. It requires multiple levels of due diligence and proposals and oral hearings and submissions, and it can go on sometimes for months and months, sometimes even years to win a contract. And obviously there are extremely strict security measures in place regarding the use of contractors. So the mere fact that Psy Group were, according to the article, seeking to partner with SCL in order to pitch for US defence work would suggest that they were a recognised vendor or an approved vendor or had some traction or history of delivering to the US Department of Defence, which would imply that they'd been vetted for that purpose. But I'm purely speculating.
Okay, so the article it didn't say that they're not seeking to. The article is very clear that that Psy Group signed a memorandum of understanding with Cambridge Analytica. That's not your understanding at all.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
That, according to the Wall Street Journal, Psy Group signed a memorandum of understanding with Cambridge Analytica. That's not the case as far as you're concerned.
Well, look, I can't be more strange with you than I have been, which is I haven't seen any document. I hadn't heard of the company before I read this article, and just because the Wall Street Journal have reported it certainly doesn't mean that they've got the facts correct.
Okay, so if Cambridge Analytica had signed a memorandum of understanding with Psy Group that would allow the two firms to cooperate on a case-by-case basis to provide intelligence and social media services, as the CEO, you would have known about it and you would have signed off on it.
My suspicion, and again I'm speculating committee, my suspicion is that in their reporting the Wall Street Journal have used the name Cambridge Analytica when they may have meant to use the name SCL Group. But in answer to your question, I would be very surprised if a memorandum of understanding had been signed with Cambridge Analytica that I was unaware of.
Could anyone else have signed it, if not the CEO?
I'd have to see the document, but certainly someone else, possibly one of the other C staff, could have signed that. That is true.
But it's entirely feasible then that SCL Group could have signed a memorandum of understanding with Psy Group without your knowledge.
SCL Group had its own CEO, and as I said to the committee very clearly when I was here last, because there was quite a lot of confusion about the group structure. I said SCL Group is a different company, it has different offices, has different staff, it works on different contracts, and moreover, as a defence contractor, it has different security status, and therefore it's privileged to work and address different things to Cambridge Analytica.
Very briefly, well, what contracts did you pitch for in America post November of 16?
November
of 16.
What political contracts did we pitch for?
Yeah,
in the United
what government contracts did you pitch for post?
Government or political?
Well, I'll do both. I'll go government contracts.
Well, the government contracts that we would have pitched for in the US post-November 16 would have been pitched for by SCL Group, and those would have been contracts that would have spanned defence to homeland security to other government divisions, and my mind is escaping me now, a broad range, but I couldn't speak specifically as to what contracts they were pitching for.
And do you know which one they won?
Well, again, as a general rule of thumb, we don't speak about client contracts, so if you can help me understand why this is relevant to the committee.
No, I'm just trying to get to that you're divorcing yourself entirely from what's going on with SCL Group. There may or may not have been a relationship between the SCI Group and SCL, but that's something that you claim to be absolutely and completely unaware of or have anything to do with. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Time to move on. So I'll ask a couple, if I may, Chair. I've got a copy of your digital overview. Now, it's a few years old, this. Ms Stevens referred to it before. But some of these short-term interventions it's listed in the digital overview include a denial of service attacks. Distributed denial of service attacks. Did you ever undertake any?
So this was a company that we looked at forming and we never formed, and that company never undertook any work whatsoever.
Right.
And in answer to your question, no, we didn't.
Why did you consider it?
At the time, we were looking at different technologies, expanding into different technological areas, and this seemed like an interesting business, but we didn't have the capability, was probably the truth, to be able to deliver meaningfully in this business area.
Was it illegal at that time?
What was illegal?
Instituting a distributed denial of service attack. Was it illegal?
I really don't know. I can't speak to technology like that.
Right, because it's illegal now.
Right. I don't know. It's not something that we ever built. It's not something that we ever undertook. It's a company that was never realised.
Okay. The only reason I ask is because it would give me concern that you have the mens rea to undertake activities which are perhaps outside the law. But if you never went ahead and did it, fair enough. Can I ask one other area, so I don't want to take up too much more time. I want to invite you to see if you can remember a question that I put to you at the last evidence session where you gave evidence, which was concerning a £24.2 million payment from Delaware registered Cambridge Analytica, the American Cambridge Analytica, to the UK registered SCL elections. Do you remember we had a conversation about that?
Yes, I do.
And I think at the time you weren't willing to let me know what the payment was for. Can you let me know what the payment was for now?
Again, I can't see, unless you can help me understand the relevance of that to the committee, I can't see how that is important.
Well, let me see if I can help you understand the relevance, because under the terms of the bankruptcy that you filed in the state of New York, a statement of financial affairs has been published, and the documents are available. And it looks from the analysis that Cambridge Analytica has no cost associated with the revenue it receives and manages, and manages to transfer more money to SCL elections than it declares that it generates. So, for example, in 2016, Cambridge Analytica had a gross revenue of $25,299,213. But according to Companies House, under a related party transaction disclosure, SCL Elections received income from Cambridge Analytica of £24.2 million, or in dollars, $34 million.
Right.
So there seems to be some money transfers going on between the two companies. And I'm keen to know whether that's work that is being undertaken between the two companies, or whether it's a way of using to distribute finance from one side of the Atlantic to the other.
No, it reflects the relationship between the two companies and the work that was going on between them.
What kind of work?
Well, I suppose this comes into the structure of the companies, which was a point that we discussed at some length with some confusion. Would this be a good opportunity to try and explain that to you?
I'm very grateful for you too, but it is quite a confusing structure, so if I'm very happy for you to add to that, if Mr Matheson's happy with that.
If you are Chair,
Yes,
we'll follow your lead.
Yeah.
So, if I may approach, I would like to hand out just a 4-page document, because in anticipation of this, what I've tried to do is to take what is ostensibly quite a complex structure and to simplify it, to help the committee to understand the relationship between the companies and the brands they represented, and how the company expanded and contracted and expanded again, which gave rise to what is an unnecessarily complex structure, but actually had nothing nefarious, and certainly didn't reflect a mafia-style franchise, as has been alluded to.
I think we said milk mafia.
The
rather
staff
than mafia. Ms Nix, can I ask, are you happy for the committee to publish this as a written submission for the benefit of people that obviously can't see it today?
Yes, that's fine.
So are you going to talk to this, or do you
I was going to talk you through it. Would that be? It won't take more than a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, if you're happy to, yeah.
Of course.
So if you look at the first slide, what I've tried to do is I've tried to distinguish between the employer, i.e. the company that actually contracted employees, and this, I think there was a lot of confusion about Brittany saying she worked for SCL or Cambridge, or Jordana Cambridge or SCL, or both. And I'm hoping to address that with this. And then underneath we have the brands, and the brands are simply the marketing or client-facing vehicles which provided services to the clients. So between 2005 and 2012, we had a British company called Strategic Communication Laboratories, and underneath that were 4 brands. We had a defence company, which obviously serviced government and defence work, a commercial for selling toothpaste, elections for political work, and social for undertaking social and humanitarian work. In 2012, my partner and I decided to separate the organisation, and he retained Strategic Communication Laboratories Limited, and his brand became known as SCL Group and continued to focus on global defence work. I incorporated a new company called SCL Elections Limited, and I focused on the 3 other divisions: commercial, elections, and social.
So was the SCL Group defence work then, was that run by Nigel Oakes?
That's correct.
Yes, yeah.
And these really were completely separate companies, which is why there have been a lot of allegations in the press, and Mr. Wiley, again, has made a lot of insinuations that we are some sort of military contractor that uses military technology on elections. As you can see, there is no crossover, there is no staff, no IP methodology that was shared between these companies. They were completely separate. In around 2014, we incorporated Cambridge Analytica in the United States, and obviously that was a US vehicle, and we needed a US employer to staff that, so we established SCL Inc., and that became the employer of staff for our US projects. And for global projects, we continue to use SCL Elections, and again we worked across these other brands. Again, Nigel Oakes' company, Stratcom Labs, continued to be a completely separate entity. And towards the end of 17, early 18, we then amalgamated the group together. We got rid of the other brands, and you can see that our UK and US defence companies came together as one brand, obviously staffed by the two different employers, and Cambridge Analytica became the brand for global political and commercial work.
Yeah. Who owns them?
I beg your pardon?
Who owns them?
Well, again, I can't see the relevance of that, and I think you told you last time that we don't speak about shareholders.
Right. Well, it is relevant, and I'll explain why in a moment. But can I ask the question again? Who owns these companies?
Well, again, this is the private companies that have been invested into by private individuals, and there is no need for me to elaborate on shareholdings.
Is Robert Mercer a shareholder?
As I've made it quite clear to you, there's no need for me to talk about these things.
Is Steve Bannon a shareholder?
We can keep this up
We
all
can
afternoon,
indeed, yeah, we can
but
indeed.
I'm afraid I'm not going to answer your questions.
Okay. The reason it's relevant, you'd asked me for the relevance, and the reason it's relevant is because I'm looking at these money transfers, and and thank you for this, by the way, I will have a proper look at that when we've got more time. We've got money transfers from the United States to the United Kingdom.
Uh-huh.
And there is a lack of clarity about what the money was actually for, but if it was for work that was being done in the United Kingdom by a British company, for political activity in the United States, I have a concern that that might be illegal in the United States. If it was work that was done in the United Kingdom for political activity in the United Kingdom using funds that were provided by an overseas source, I have a fear that that would be illegal in the United Kingdom. So can I ask again, who provided the funds and who owns them companies?
Well, this is an area, again, unfortunately, that is going to stretch into ongoing investigations. And so, again, this is one of those areas that I'm afraid has to be privileged until these investigations are concluded. So, again, I would really like to explain this to you because there is very simple explanations to this, but simply because it touches on some of the investigations that I've been made aware of, I can't go there.
Okay, I respect that, Mr. Nix. You talked before in one of the more heated moments of these sessions about concerns about big international conspiracies. If there were to be one, then the transfer of money to influence elections and referendums in this country by people who are not British would be included in consideration of a big international conspiracy, wouldn't it?
Well, I think, and I'm hopeful that we've reached a consensus on this, but I think that we are all of the mind that Cambridge Analytica, SCL Elections did not undertake any work in the UK on the referendum. We did no paid or unpaid work. That was certainly the finding of the Electoral Commission. And so what you're suggesting simply isn't relevant.
So in that case, this would be work undertaken in the United Kingdom for political activity in the United States, which I think is problematical in the United States.
Again, this is something that it touches on investigation, so I can't speak to it. But obviously, we have a US company in the United States for undertaking US work, and we have a British company in the UK for undertaking British work. And that's all I can say on the matter.
Okay, well, I'm grateful for that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, just on that structure, I know we spoke about this quite a lot earlier on when we were talking about the work of AIQ and Dr. Kogan and the Cambridge Analytica SCL teams. In the work that was being done for John Bolton in those political races in 2014, do you remember where people were geographically based when they were doing that work? So we know that we had SCL, Kogan and AIQ working on the same project. Where were they? Were they all based in one office in one country, or did they work remotely?
Well, again, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'd love to explain this to you, but this again touches on some of these investigations. I simply can't do that.
Because obviously, I mean, I think it's a matter of interest to say if Dr. Kogan, as it would seem, was based in England, or we know he was in St. Petersburg working from time to time, and AIQ are based in Canada, and if they're processing US electoral data about US citizens and designing campaign tools from outside of the United States, is to whether that is legal. Not a matter for this committee to determine. There are US agencies that can do that, but I think it's a pertinent question, even if it's not one that we can discuss today.
I appreciate that.
Ian Lucas.
Did you present to gain a contract in connection with Dominica in September of 2009?
I'd have to confirm the timing, but I did work in Dominica, yes.
Was that you personally?
I came in and out of the project. I was not running the project, but I was there.
So you were involved in the project?
Not on a day-to-day basis. Typically, I would work on the sales and obviously working with the client, but I wouldn't manage the campaigns themselves.
Can I present you with a copy of a document, which I believe is an SCL document? And it says at the top, election clients.
Mm-hmm.
And included in that graphic are Russian clients. Can you confirm that's correct?
That's certainly what the picture illustrates.
And is that a SCL document?
So I can explain this for you
Is that an SCL document?
Well, it certainly looks like it is.
Right. Earlier, you said that there were no Russian clients for SCL.
Mm-hmm.
But this document contradicts that statement, doesn't it?
Well, actually, what I said to you was that in the 14 years that I've been working for the company, and I was very explicit about this when I saw the committee last time, in the 14 or 15 years that I've been working for the company, to the best of my knowledge, we've not hired any Russians, we've not worked with any Russians, we've not worked with any Russian clients, we've not worked in Russia, etc., etc. I think that previous to my joining the company, my colleagues worked on a program for Gazprom in Russia, and this was a piece of commercial work. That would have been in the late 90s or early 2000s is my understanding. I can't speak to that. I wasn't in the company. I was probably still at university.
Okay, so that was before your time.
That is correct.
But this document says explicitly election clients, doesn't it?
That is correct.
And you were presenting with a specific reference to Russian election clients. Why was that?
Well, I've subsequently followed up on this, and it seems that this document was produced as part of a larger document that had all clients on it. So some election clients, some commercial clients, and some social clients, and then that was edited down to just election clients, and obviously it reflects some of the wrong clients.
So what you're saying, just to sound clear, you're saying that this graphic is inaccurate.
I'm saying that this graphic is inaccurate, and that we, as far as I am aware, we've never worked on a Russian election, and that whilst some work has been done with Russian clients prior to my joining the company, I have no knowledge of that and cannot speak to it.
Can you explain the relationship between Cambridge Analytica and Lukoil, the Russian oil company?
Yes, I can. Very much I can. This, again, was another allegation very forcefully put forward by Mr. Wiley that somehow we were involved with a Russian company, and I think he went on to say that we exposed ourselves to sharing data and information with the FSB, another one of these ludicrous conspiracy theories. the relationship is much more benign than that. We were introduced to Lukoil in Turkey, to their office in Istanbul in 2014. The purpose of the meeting was to explore whether we might be able to use micro-targeting capabilities to target their clients with different messages to increase the sales of petrol at Lukoil petrol stations in either Antalya or in Istanbul.
Who made the introduction?
The introduction was made by some Turkish colleagues of mine. I went for a 2-day trip to Istanbul. I probably met with 8 or 9 companies, from an airline to Lukoil to manufacturing companies and product companies and so forth. And we explored working opportunities in Turkey. This was one of those pitches. It's extremely well documented, this particular set of meetings and the follow-up. We did submit a proposal to undertake a pilot project where we were looking at, I think, 3, 5, 7, I cannot remember, gas stations or petrol stations where we were going to market to people local to that station to see if we could demonstrate an increase in sales. It was a Turkish project for a Turkish subsidiary of a Russian company that ultimately never moved forward. And so any allegations that this was something nefarious or connected with intelligence or data sharing or Russian involvement in the US election is just another one of these groundless, breathtakingly groundless allegations.
You did the presentation to Lukoil. Did you represent to them that you had clients in Russia previously?
I don't know what particular sales deck I was using. This was in 2014. We do a lot of sales pitches. I'm sure you could tell me better because I'm sure you're about to show me what was presented.
No, I'm not actually. I'm just asking you a question.
But I don't know. It would have been a very generic sales pitch, I would have thought. The only problem was at that time was that although we were always keen on getting into the commercial space, the pitch to Lukoil and those other companies in Turkey was really our first proper foray into this space, and we didn't really have a demonstrable track record to give to potential clients. So in order to help explain the methodology that we proposed to use for them, we used that through illustrations of some of the political work that we'd done, or certainly in terms of the methodology, to show them how we could segment and target audiences for selling more petrol at petrol stations.
Were you ever introduced to any business, or have you, any of your employees pitched for business by New Century Media, the financial PR consultancy in London?
Yeah, that company rings a bell. Could you tell me a little bit more about it? Who's the principal?
You tell me a little bit more about it. What do you know about New Century Media? I'd like you to answer my question, actually.
Well, so I suppose what I'm really grappling with is I can recognise the name, but in order to help me put them on the map, if you could tell me their office address or who the CEO is, then I might be able to help you.
Now, what I want you to say is, did that company ever introduce you to any businesses or any?
I can't recall. I genuinely can't recall.
Is it true that one of New Century Media's main PR clients is your former majority shareholder, Vincent Cengiz?
I'm struggling to remember who New Century Media are. So if you
it just seems that the former majority shareholder of New Century Media is Vincent Cengiz. Who, do you know him?
Yes, of course.
Has he or New Century Media ever brokered any business for SCL?
Well, Vincent Cengiz was an investor in SCL Group in 2005. I believe he sold his equity in the company in, I'm going to struggle, 2010 maybe, 2011. I'd have to check. You could check at Companies House, I'm sure.
Were you ever introduced by New Century Media to any business?
Look, I'm really not trying to obfuscate my answer here. I cannot remember who they are. If you can't just help me understand who they are, I can't answer your question fairly. David Burnside. Okay, yes, I have met David Burnside. I am familiar with him. I lost one of my senior staff members to him some time ago. I don't believe that we ever did any work with them, but I'd have to revert to you on that. I really, really can't remember.
Did he introduce you to any Russian business?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Russian potential clients?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Have you ever met with Mr. Alexander Nekrasov?
No.
Thank you very much.
Just a couple of follow-up questions on Lukoil. I've seen a copy of the presentation that was given. So what are the case studies? There are two striking case studies, which, as you allude to, are political. One of which is on raising awareness of national security issues in the campaigns that were run for John Bolton, and the other is raising voter turnout strategically for America, again in political campaigns in America. Can you see how people that are familiar with this might raise an eyebrow that actually the political work done for John Bolton or paid for by John Bolton in America is presented to the Turkish subsidiary of a Russian oil company as part of a customer focused campaign trying to get people to buy more petrol from their pumps? I mean, it just seems like an odd series of case studies to use in a presentation like that.
Well, I think I've explained this, haven't I? I mean, you accept the fact that we were trying to demonstrate a methodology, that we didn't have any relevant case studies, and in order to illustrate how this methodology could be deployed, we illustrated it through example.
Yeah, I understand that, and I accept you've given your answer to the committee on that. But in terms of the concerns this may raise for other people, is I know some people might be concerned that the work that was done for John Bolton in America, highly sophisticated piece of work of very sophisticated voter targeting for an election campaign. Now, if that's just being used as an example of these are the improved results we got because of the work we did, that's one thing. But if the kind of some of the methodology or work behind that was being discussed and shared with clients in other countries, particularly a company, a Turkish subsidiary of a Russian oil company, some people might be concerned as to whether that's an appropriate sharing of information and insight and knowledge as part of your work. Can you see why people may be raise some
look, I
concerns?
think the
for some
implication you're trying to make is that we were sharing some top secret intelligence. Please understand, and I'm sure, as Dr. Kogan will tell you, and I'm sure certainly Chris Wiley purports to be a data scientist, he can certainly speak to this. Micro-targeting is a very common practice that has been undertaken all over the world in very many jurisdictions, and this is not some government secret that we're giving away. We're talking about how to segment and target small audience groups of people. Most sophisticated advertising agencies would be able to give a similar presentation all over the world. So I'm not entirely sure what you're alluding to.
Well, I appreciate you say you didn't have very much commercial experience, and the pitch was from SEL commercial rather than SEL elections. You used what you had. But I'm saying is that the reason probably it's raised concerns with some people about the nature of this pitch, the nature of the work you might have done, if you were referencing and using political work you've done in America to a Russian-owned oil company in Turkey, That's probably why people get concerned about it. You may know that that's totally innocent and there's no question of any kind of data or intelligence being compromised in any way. But I think you can see why people have become concerned about it. I mean, your other chart is very helpful in demonstrating the separation of companies as well. But the same day you're presenting to Lukoil in Turkey, and SEL Group are doing strategic communications work to countering Russian intelligence in Riga at the NATO Strategic Communications Centre on the same day, discussing some of the same techniques and approaches. You could see why some people
that's
get concerned
not true.
about that.
That's not true at all, because the work that was being pioneered by SEL Group under Nigel's steerage was completely different to the work that we were doing. We were using big data to target and segment audiences, and he was using behavioural communications to deliver. I don't know what was happening on that particular project, but PSYOP training to governments or other similar strategic communication programs. There isn't an overlap, as has been suggested in the media and obviously by Mr. Wiley. There were very different methodologies. What we were doing is really quite benign. And the technologies that were originally pioneered by Obama's campaign in 2008 and then obviously used in 2012 and then developed by us in our own way in 2014, 15, 16 and so forth. This is similar technologies that advertising agencies, other political consultancies were using all across America and certainly across Western Europe, but possibly not in countries such as Turkey, which was why we saw a potential market opportunity to be able to offer them. There's no sharing of secrets with a Turkish company that happens to be owned by a Russian company.
What I'm saying, you've given your answer. I think it's appropriate we ask you these questions. But I don't think this is about conspiracy theories of one or two people. I think it's people raising, a number of different people observing this activity going on, raising concerns about it, raising questions about it, which we've had the chance to put to you today. But in terms of your techniques and methodologies, whilst you say that there are lots of companies out there that do this, I think you certainly didn't sell it yourself in that way. You certainly sold, as we spoke about last time, what Cambridge Analytica does in particular as being particularly powerful, particularly effective, and particularly with the combination of not just big data but psychological profiling and Facebook data as well. We've discussed all that at length, but I think there's a particular interest in your work because of the work you were doing at that time, the high-profile campaigns you were involved with, and I think we've gone through. I don't think there's any more we can add on that today, but I think it's understandable why some people have been concerned. I don't think it's the conspiracy theories of just one person. Did you, Joe?
I've just got a couple of short questions, if I can. You described Cambridge Analytica as a very small advertising agency, I think, earlier in your evidence. So at any one time, typically, how many clients would Cambridge Analytica be representing? Not just having them on your books, but actually doing work for?
Well, you've seen how the company has developed. You're talking specifically about Cambridge Analytica, or are you talking about SEO?
Cambridge Analytica.
And are you talking about politics, or are you talking about...
I'm asking, at any one time,
commercial
typically,
work?
how many clients would Cambridge Analytica be working
Well,
for?
let us say, before... When I last saw you in February the 27th, 2018, we had 30 clients or 35 clients on our books at that time.
And do you ever do any due diligence on prospective clients?
Well, clearly not enough, as was demonstrated by the Channel 4 video.
Do you do any? Do you have a process in place for any sort of due diligence?
Well, it depends on what clients.
Is that a yes or a no? Yes, you do due diligence, or no, you don't?
In some cases, we undertake due diligence, and in other cases, we don't. If you're working for Mercedes-Benz, it's a different value proposition it's a different proposition, I beg your pardon, to if you're working for a company maybe you've never heard about. So it's not a yes or no answer.
Okay. And then finally, can we just go back to where we started, which was about the $8 million. Did you take $8 million out of the company?
Well, look, again, I think I've answered this extremely clearly, which is that story was based on a false allegation. It's been very bad, very inaccurately reported, I only saw it this morning briefly before I came to this committee hearing. I haven't had the chance to even read it properly. I need to digest it and decide with my counsel, how we want to follow up.
That's not clear at all to me. I'm sorry, Mr. Nix. Did you take £8
Well,
million out?
the answer
or
to your
didn't
question is that
Yes or no?
I'm not answering your question. I haven't had the ability to consider the matter myself and to decide what action I'm going to take.
So you
in
don't
regards to that.
want to answer the question?
I do not want to answer the question.
Okay.
Well, as in February, today, Mr. Nix, and we're here to follow facts, not prejudices or conspiracy theories, whoever may hold them. But to us today, you've presented Cambridge Analytica SCL Elections as an ethical company, essentially, striving, as you used the term in February, for best practice with checks and balances and compliance processes, that's absolutely not guilty of any of the dirty tricks or alleged stings that have been in different jurisdictions, including Nigeria with the video, and the Caribbean, that have been sort of retailed in recent months since you came here, and yet now Cambridge Analytica is bust. Who knows what will follow? If none of this is true, why do you think so many people have had it in for you?
That's a very good question, and I'm pleased that you asked that. I think I've touched on this before, but I think that I can answer that question. I think that our involvement in the US election, for the election of a president who's proved to be so divisive among voters and polarizing amongst voters, put an incredibly huge target on our back, and that ever since that day, although it was a great success in some terms for the company and its business growth, it actually proved to be its undoing, because from that moment onwards there were actors, not least Democrats and the liberal media particularly, who were just determined to destroy us, absolutely destroy us, and we became the target of a sustained press and media attack. Now you couple that with the reporting in the UK, driven largely by Carol and The Guardian, about our involvement in Brexit, and obviously that was proved to be false reporting at every level, but we were in this country then perceived to be the architects of that campaign, and we were vilified and hated for that. And you add into the mix an extremely jealous and resentful employee who sat there and stewed for 3 years as his baby grew and matured and got all this success. And he then saw this opportunity to go to Carol and to share with her every single possible fantastical allegation that he could come up with. And she gave him the mouthpiece to be able to put all of this into print so that it went viral on a global scale, and you have the makings of a perfect storm. You have people who the public want to hate because of our association with Trump and our false association with Brexit. You have somebody who's deeply motivated to destroy us, who's feeding snippets of information, half-baked allegations to a media organisation that's incredibly influential and powerful. And obviously, The Guardian, and particularly Carol, thought that if by attacking Cambridge Analytica and proving that we had been involved in the referendum and that our involvement had somehow been illegal, that they might be able to push for a second referendum, which is exactly what they tried to do together yesterday, that they might be able to change the course of history. And I genuinely, wholeheartedly believe that that is what has happened. I believe that people in America can't accept that Trump is their president, and they want to blame someone for that. And people in England are looking, led by Carol, are looking to use us as a way to overturn the outcome of this referendum that they don't agree with. And the fact of the matter is, we didn't work on the referendum. The overwhelming vast majority of the allegations against us are just simply patently not true and are being proven to be not true. Yes, gosh, I'm so guilty of being foolish, but that hardly constitutes the kind of cataclysmic response that we've received from the press and media and the destruction of an otherwise, I say humbly, but brilliant, growing tech company staffed by super talented people that could have gone on to really do some exciting and good things in this world. And that's your answer.
But just a final question, thought for you. But if a company is responsibly led, none of that explains why, when there are allegations of dirty tricks or exciting capers to try and swing elections with a little bit more of a twist than using digital marketing techniques, why in those circumstances you should give them credence by behaving as you did on film with Channel 4. I think foolishness doesn't even begin to describe it, really.
Well, look, we could go back over this. I think this committee, I hope this committee can empathise with my position just a little bit. But it wasn't just a single incident. It has been a perfect storm. It was a very, very coordinated attack by the New York Times, by Channel 4, by The Guardian, and by Chris Wiley. They all came together and manufactured a string of allegations together with a bit of foolishness and together with, obviously, the whole GSR and Facebook debacle. And we have become the object of global hatred, and that is why our company has finished.
Thank you, Chair.
You've answered our questions today. I think we're drawing to a close. This is not, I would put to you, a matter of a campaign being run by one or two individuals or one or two journalists, because if it was, you wouldn't be being under investigation by as many authorities as you are, and that these are very serious matters. I think you were not straight with the committee in February, certainly on the questions around GSR and Facebook data. I think you yourself have acknowledged that in part, that the answers you gave were partial and I think misleading. A lot of the allegations that have been made against you have come from people that used to work for you, not just Mr. Wiley, but others as well. Some who do not wish to be made, to be identified, and others who have spoken out. And I think no doubt the questions will remain for as long as people do continue to speak out in that way. But I think we've covered the questions we wanted to ask you today, and thank you for coming back and giving evidence.
Thank you, Damien.
Portcullis House, the Grimmond Room,